Welcome everybody to another episode of Break the Rules. I am Left Polyakov at LeftPo on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Don't forget to do that. And we have a very exciting episode here. Of course, the great Giovanni Panicietti, as always. And we have Hotep Sophia, returning champion. Hotep Sophia, thank you so much for coming in. And we've got Samuel Hammond in the house. Thank you so much, Samuel, for coming in. And a little bit about Samuel. I will let you do the full introduction yourself, but you are Director of Poverty and Welfare Policy, pluralist. The world is second best at best, and you are part of the Nixon Center. So are you the Director of Poverty and Welfare Policy at the Nixon Center?
Yes, Niskanen.
Niskanen. Oh, man.
Niskanen,
yes. Yeah. Niskanen. And shout out to Peter over there in the chat, and Philip Daniel. Welcome, everybody. So, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Niskanen? I read about it in Wikipedia. It seems like a very interesting organization.
Yeah, sure. We're a DC-based think tank. We today describe ourselves as moderate. I would say that in many ways we're trying to be the moderates that we want to see in the world, right? There's an awful lot of disaffection with centrism in America, partly because it became associated with, kind of Paul Ryanism, taking away your Social Security and invading other countries. and there's nothing like necessarily centrist about any of those things. So we're kind of a full stack think tank. I do poverty, welfare, labor market policy, industrial policy, manufacturing, a whole host of different things. My colleagues work in immigration reform, climate change, carbon taxing, a bunch of different stuff. But I think the underlying theme is we're trying to synthesize aspects of the left and the right to try to broker deals and be that kind of connective tissue in a country that's otherwise become hyperpolarized.
And since the theme here is progress, how do you define progress? I'm going to ask you, how do you define progress? And I'm going to go to Sophia and Gio.
You go to them first. I'm going to pull up a link because I actually wrote an article on progress studies that I tried to define it. So I'll drop that in.
Excellent, excellent. So let's go with Hotep Sophia. How do you define progress?
I think there's a way. Well, for me, the progress is actually moving humanity forward, not necessarily advancing an individual's perspective on how things move forward, but literally the process of moving humanity forward out of this sort of three-dimensional world that we're in and into a fourth-dimensional, five-dimensional sort of world, and what that looks like and how people experience that. And I think that as we actually progress, you can see the difference. Like I have kids, so the difference in my baby, my oldest child, who is 13, when she was a baby, versus the difference in my newborn, my 5-month-old, at 5 months, is just a huge difference. He can do things that she just wasn't doing at 5 and 6 months. And I noticed that for my third child. I noticed that with everybody's kids. They're just, they're getting more bright. They're, able to do more stuff, and their systems are advancing more rapidly, and I'm sure that has something to do with technology, but you can actually see progress, and that's how I conceptualize it.
Do you see there being this dichotomy between, on the one hand, progress when it comes to kids getting used to technology, and on the other hand, there being a certain level, and I'm not saying for your kids seem to be very well adjusted from what I was able to see. They're very nice, very outgoing, but there is still this idea of the internet, and especially social media, creating a social how do you put it, isolation. I know, Gio, like, what kind of words would you use here to describe
atomization, deracination? Yeah, you get the bit.
Yeah, there's a huge problem with that, as far as social media specifically is concerned, with the kids wanting to sort of put their whole lives on a screen so people can see it. And so what I've done with my 13-year-old is I told her in no uncertain terms that if she puts her real face on the internet that someone's going to come and snatch her away. I mean, that's just what, I mean, there's nothing else. The 5-year-old hasn't gotten that far yet. She had a tablet. I took it away. She was watching TV. I stopped that too. I mean, not even TV, but just YouTube, because it's just, it's overwhelming. So I've taken that from her too. But I mean, that's as far as parenting is concerned with progress, you really need to regress. Like, they don't need all of these bright things to look at. Like, you give them a ball and let them figure out what to do with it for 4 hours. That's, you know, a better situation than letting them sit in front of the TV 8, 10, 12 hours, you know, especially with this whole COVID thing. You know, my kids were already homeschooled, but they did go to a physical building because they were in a co-op. But then once that stopped, it was just like, okay, now what am I going to do? There's no way I could just let my kids sit, you know, in the house and do nothing all day, every day for months and months on end, like some other parents have. So I took the approach of, look, outside is safe. We're going to find stuff to do outside. And we went somewhere almost every day. Like, I just had to, because I said, there's no way we're going to sit in the house and get caught up in this whole TV all day, every day, you know, internet, whatever is going on. We're going to have to find something to do. And it was very, very difficult. And I'm the only one of my friends who went to the extremes that I did and have gone. And so progress for, as far as education, for me would be to regress. Like, everybody should just stay home and do the homeschool thing and literally like join groups of activities and you know, go to the park and all that stuff. To me seems like it's better than, you know, having the government at any time decide, oh, schools are going to be closed for a whole year. Boom, you're done. And where in Maryland, schools are not really reopened yet. They just reopened. But my friend was like, this is their first year of high school. They've already been home for 6, 7, 8 months. They're not going to go back to school for a month. And so, like, it's just been like horrible all around. And so knowing that the government can now do that, I just decided I'm not going to put myself in a position where the government could do that to me.
Well, this brings up a very important point, which I wanted to get into as far as progress goes, as far as who ends up pulling the levers and what effect does that cause. So, Samuel, when it comes to the kind of things you guys are thinking about as far as policy goes, what I'm curious about here is actually from Gio's perspective, because I think Gio is able to talk about this more eloquently than I can, honestly, when it comes to certain things that, let's say, may end up being missed by certain think tanks. Like, Gio, we had recently a very interesting program on governance, and we had Mark Terrell on, and his whole thing happened to be a lot more, you know, with by-the-numbers thinking, more managerial-style thinking, and a lot of the people in the chat and in the comments, they reacted pretty negatively towards that as far as certain unintended consequences that come about when people plan things out. So I want to get to the root of this, because I don't want to hold back. I really want to find out, like, what the big disagreement here is. If there is a disagreement, maybe we don't disagree at all. So, Gio, take it from here.
Well, it's funny Hotep Sophia mentioned about schooling, because a friend of the show, Justin Murphy, recently had a podcast on his Other Life podcast with a good friend of mine, Nina Power. They were talking about the works of Ivan Illich, who basically invented the concept of unschooling, and how taking works from such people as Michel Foucault and talking about how the modern school system itself is like a form of like disciplinary regimentation. But it's interesting about you mentioned the Terrell stream, because I think, just to start off really quickly, the idea of progress itself is like, this is going off of the Nesbitt book, right? The idea of progress. Do you define it so much as in material terms, as in the quantifiable aspect of the most amount of people having their material conditions met? Do you define it that way, and also the way of like just basic accumulation? So we live in an advanced consumer society. How come the rest of the world can't be an advanced consumer society? Or is the idea of progress something that is more localized, as it was back in the day, or tied to a certain culture's particular notions of what it means to advance themselves and their interests and their people and their ethnos and their culture and religion, so on and so forth. So this was what Nesbitt was trying to do in his book. Well, actually, it's 3 volumes.
And what is the book called?
It's called The History of the Idea of Progress. It's very foundational, like a lot of Marxists took inspiration from it. But there's a lot of flaws in it, obviously, from my perspective. But he says how Christianity was a vector of the transformation of the idea of progress, coming from the idea of like localized, usually Hellenistic cultures, and something that is a notion of progress that is for all people at all times greater salvation. Now, the problem is, of course, when you take that and you secularize it and you turn it into a political idea, which, people on my side of the spectrum, we talk about this a lot, like how there's groups of, new religions, and it's a quasi-Gnosticism that people have this idea of progress and equality and so forth. And we'll get into that, obviously. But just from the perspective of think tanks or so forth, I think the problem is, in general, I could be wrong, obviously. We have someone who is representative of a very prominent think tank. The idea of like that there is one sort of like governing global post Cold War, end of history consensus, and that it's just up to the rise of the, PMC pro managerial class, the state to just come in and instantiate itself, and that nations are going to erode, and therefore we need an expert class to come in and
well, is that the view though? Like, I'm curious, Samuel.
Well, for most people,
yeah, but Samuel, would you say that is the view, or where do you?
And before that, I would just
say
that Samuel has a very uphill battle, because it seems that centrism is it's nobody's buying, put it that way. So peace sells, but who's buying?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by centrism, right? There's these different kinds of centrism. Michael Lind famously talked about radical centrists being the least represented part of the American political spectrum. I came out of a libertarian world where people would get off saying that they're socially liberal, economically conservative, which represents less than 1% of the American people. That's not the kind of centrist I am. I, if anything, flip that on its head. I'm a methodological centrist in the sense that I'm not picking sides or being a partisan. I want to try to broker deals, partly deals that represent that kind of radical centrist vision, right? Because on some things, Josh Hawley and Elizabeth Warren will agree, or Mike Lee and AOC will agree that we should, let's say, do medical research into psychedelics, right? or an issue that I work on, child benefits. The Biden admin just passed this expanded child tax credit, which I've been working on for about 4 or 5 years now. Simultaneously, Mitt Romney put out his own proposal for a child benefit, even more generous, right? And they're coming at this not as a kind of a shadowy compromise, like quote unquote bipartisanship, when Joe Lieberman and John McCain go into a smoke-filled room and come out with something everyone hates. It's more like it's more like Mitt Romney and Michael Bennet go into a public square and come out with something everyone likes, right? At least in theory, these things are possible, and they're not just possible, but they're kind of essential, because the way our Congress is set up and the way it works, and the only way it gets things done is if you get to 60 votes, at least for now. And what that means is, there are always things that Congress will agree on. They'll agree to pass the National Defense Reauthorization because, war making is bipartisan. But there are things that are just as important, or if not more important, that really demand attention, legislative attention, that require structural change, that require renewing our institutions, so we're not just going down this doom loop, and that is going to require people coming together. It's not going to happen with Justice Democrats or the Freedom Caucus doing things unilaterally. They can help shape the narrative, but there needs to be someone holding the center together.
But it seems that, like, I forget who said it. It may have been one of my Twitter mutuals, may have been Zero HP Lovecraft, that said radical centrism is actually is in some ways overrepresented, at least in terms of things like the Washington machine, if you will. the notion, like, I think most people, not most people, it could just be because I hang out with weirdos all day online, but a lot of people believe that we're sort of living in like an era of an autonomous political class, that they do things in a bipartisan way, but as you've said, they're very unpopular. Like Mitt Romney's a good example, because a lot of people that do vote Republican in the GOP, I mean, whatever you want to say, I personally think they're a bunch of sellouts as well, but a lot of people that vote GOP, they would say that Mitt Romney's an example of like a total sellout that has in every opportunity screwed the voting base of the average Republican to have this sort of like fake media, like celebrity type of thing where he's one of the good ones, you know? So that being said, I think that the idea, like most people, it's actually crazy in my opinion. Most people would tolerate, I think, the opposite, which is more fiscally socialistic and more socially conservative type of policies. But then, of course, the media and so forth would say that's fascism, that's Nazi, that's their position. So I don't know, but yet, like you've said, it seems to me that, I mean,
that's Trump much closer to my agenda, right? Like my agenda, my actual policy agenda. So take something like a child allowance.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the arguments for it is, well, you know, structurally it is fiscally liberal, right? Where we want to give every family in the country the baseline support they need in terms of cash benefits to be able to raise the family how they want. But the latter point is just as important, how they want. That recognizing that we live in a very pluralistic, diverse society, and you know, elite cultural preferences do not necessarily map onto the preferences of, you know, that family in Provo, Utah with 6 kids. And are we building pluralism into our programs, or are we doing things that are technocratically going to increase GDP, but are really very value laden, right?
And I see you were looking at the chat because Bruce mentioned Mormons. So there we go.
Well, we've had Mormons on the show, so
yes, we have a lot of Mormons.
Well,
on the show.
There's a lot of Mormons in Washington and Virginia around there's a lot of intelligence agency apparently. There's a lot of Mormons.
Yeah, because they don't drink and they learn languages on their missionary trips.
Oh yeah, that's
yeah,
why.
definitely helps. But as far as certain things that people can look at from afar as being, okay, this policy sounds good, we're not talking about war, we're not talking about destruction, what could possibly go wrong? Like Geo and Hotep Sophia, would there be any policies that do not involve war that you would say DC, like the DC machine in general, has tried to advocate for that has resulted in a lot of problems down the line? Because now you have the opportunity.
Tons.
I mean, you're out of DC right now, Sophia, from what I understand, but you were in the swamp, you were in the machine, and now Samuel here is still in there, so you have an opportunity to voice your concerns about certain things that you have seen, and you know, for them to be able to be addressed.
Well, one thing I wanted to say is something that Gio had mentioned about people not. I'm sorry. About people not
Speaking
wanting
about the child tax credit.
I know. Well, yeah, like that's helpful now, but maybe. I mean, you have to have.
By the way, please speak closer to the mic.
So you have to have people who will actually work in order for that to work out well. But what I was going to say about something Gio mentioned about, you know, having an elite class of people who make the decisions for basically everybody, that's been an ongoing issue in the Black community because of the whole talented 10th, which I don't know how this always gets brought up, but this is just, it always goes back to this. There's people who think that, you know, there should be a talented group of Blacks who lead the other Blacks around, and the other Blacks aren't smart enough to make the decisions for themselves. And this goes round and round. So I think it's interesting that it's, you know, always going round and round, but it's everybody. They just always think that there's a group of people that should be making the decisions for other people. And then something that Samuel said that I thought was extremely important is that you have, like you were saying about being able to have choices in how you do things. That's a lot of the problem. Like, so for example, in Maryland, so I gave birth in Virginia, but I tried to take my baby to the doctor in Maryland. And in order for my child to see the doctor in Maryland, I had to agree in advance for them to receive every jab on the schedule at the time when I took him. Now, he didn't receive any jabs in Virginia, And I was just going to wait and let his immune system build up because of the whole situation, me not knowing I was pregnant. I didn't want to just introduce a bunch of stuff to him. Well, in Maryland, that's not an option. Like, I don't have a choice. If I want to see a doctor with whatever insurance I have, if I want to see a pediatrician, I have to agree in advance to a regimen of treatment that may or may not fit my child. And maybe, you know, there are people, I guess, like, who think that this sounds good, but in practice, where is my freedom and my liberty to choose what is best for my child? Because essentially the state of Maryland is telling me that what's best for my child is to receive every jab on the schedule without me having any time to look at what's in them, look at any case studies, do any research, compare any notes, get a second opinion, none of that. And I find that, you know, that's how a lot of these programs work out. Like, they say, okay, yeah, let's give this, you know, to these people. But then as soon as they give them to them, they put so many requirements on them that it makes it that it's, you know, not helpful. So I hear that this payment that's coming out is going to be, you know, $300 per child or something like that. Something that rounds up $250 for $300 for under 5, $250 for over, something like that, which is okay. But 1 week of summer camp for my older two is $250. If I was going to send my little baby to the daycare, that's $400 a week. So I understand that it's supposed to be helpful, but it's just helpful enough that if you are a person who would benefit from these things, it's just helpful enough to be unhelpful. Like, it's just enough to be like, man, this, like, so I have to send my kid to, now they're just going to give, like, in this case, they're just going to give me the money whether I do anything or not. Well, I can piece something together, but in a lot of cases, it's like, yeah, we'll give you this, but you have to do what we say with it. Yeah. And what we say is just, you know, enough, you know, to drive you crazy.
Healthcare is like one of those things that, like, in America that I truly think will probably never get solved ever.
Never.
I know, Samuel. Do you think it's going to get solved eventually?
In my country, we have an incredibly terrible healthcare system, but at least it's free, even though it may take like a few months to get.
Where are you, Gio?
I'm in Canada. I'm near Niagara Falls. So
cool.
That's, yeah.
I'm from Nova Scotia originally, so.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Down home, eh? Wow.
Yeah. I've only been in the States for 5 years. And actually, like, a lot of this is resonant to me because, well, first of all, I wouldn't be able to do my job in Canada because in Canada, policy is, you know, developed by political parties.
Yep.
And they build it out of their platform. They don't have, you know, there are lobbyists, right? There's oil and gas lobbyists and stuff like that. But the actual policy platforms are put together internal to the parties. The civil service is very professional and apolitical. Here in the U.S., in contrast, you know, there's 10 to 50,000 political appointees that staff any administration. Congress is so short-changed. Their budget is the actual committee budgets and stuff like that are so small. And over time, they've shifted into communications and things other than policy. And so literally, like, my job, the job I do today is really only, there's only a niche for this kind of think tank job because our actual institutions of government have to outsource it by design.
But you're saying it like
scary,
it's bad.
But at the same time,
but at the same time, you're saying it like it's a bad thing. To me personally, as somebody who came from the USSR, that the government does not have enough money together to do certain things that it wants to do, that's kind of a silver lining for me. Now, I know it may be different for
but then nothing
people,
gets done, Lev. Or bad things get done because now corporations control those discourses who give money to the think tanks. No, I'm not accusing your not accusing your institute think tank, of course.
Sometimes nothing is actually, our government is set up so that nothing is done. Literally, it's designed so that things don't get done. Like the closer we get back to that, in my opinion, that would also be progress, because the fact that so many things are done so fast, like $1 trillion being spent in, like, you know, a blink of an eye, like, that's not actually, it's fiscal progress, but it's not actually progressing us towards the Constitution the way that it should be.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
because if the government isn't working, then it's not just the government that the United States is made up of. The United States is made up of citizens of the United States who do work, who start businesses, who employ people, all kinds of stuff gets done. So what I want to concentrate on here, Samuel, is what Hotep Sophia was just talking about as far as there being certain traps out there, certain fly traps, whatever you want to call it, of, let's say, giving people just enough to get by, but at the same time keeping them within a certain kind of system that's going to make it that much harder for them to escape from. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that side of it.
Yeah, no, I think about this issue a lot in the poverty context because that's where a lot of my primary work is sort of this poverty trap dynamic. Are we actually setting people up to succeed or ensconcing them in bureaucracies that once they're sort of in those poverty bureaucracies, it's sort of a one-way street. You said fly trap. I like to talk about the lobster traps, right? Because lobster traps are designed for the lobster to easily walk in but not get out. So I do think about that. I think I take a little bit less cynical of a interpretation because I don't think it's that elites are designing these programs with the intention of keeping people down. I think it's more so that just take healthcare. Solving healthcare is incredibly hard. You won't solve it by being more passionate or like insisting that we need it even more than or like thinking harder. Like it actually is this balancing act of different interests, from the hospitals to the doctors to nursing associations to the insurance companies to the pharmaceutical companies. All these different actors have their own interests. They're all pulling in different directions. Any change you make to the system, because it's in such a balanced equilibrium, will create winners and losers. And because we have a political process that's driven, is short-staffed, under-resourced, and very partisan, there's no easy pathway from here to there in terms of imagining a better model.
Go on.
So what that requires are kind of like policy entrepreneurs, people who are actually working towards a common good or a general interest, and not being the pharma lobbyist or whatever that has a very narrow interest. And there just aren't as many of those actors in DC as there used to be. Partly it's because we don't have the parties playing that role where they can take a bigger picture role. Instead, the parties, whether it's the DNC or RNC, are basically just brands, empty, hollow brand names. We have the kind of committee process is incredibly fragmented. A lot of these things are really institutional failures, and it's a challenge because you want someone to blame, you want someone to scapegoat, you want to say this is broken because Bill Kristol and Paul Wolfowitz did it or something like that, and they did their own shitty things, but it's more that we're undergoing a serious sort of institutional failure, state capacity failure. Why did it take the Department of Defense over a year to develop their own cloth mask? That's absurd, right?
I want to rewind things back a bit to what you said, where you take a less Machiavellian approach as far as the intentions of people.
Less cynical.
Less cynical. Yes.
Well, everyone is cynical. I agree, but there's no Illuminati that's like organizing this. This is just chaos.
But here's what I'd like to do. I would like to find out, how do we know what we know? So, for example, how do we know that when we are talking about the Illuminati or, I don't know, Bohemian Grove, or whatever you want to say, how do we know the amount of influence people who, let's say, have certain needs in mind and are probably going to be pretty greedy, how do we know how many of them it would take to create the kind of chaotic system that we currently have, versus how much would it take in terms of honorable people, in terms of, there was an interview that I was watching on the Dick Cavett show with Orson Welles.
Great interview.
Yeah. Oh, you saw that too. Great. So you know what I'm talking about. Like, he was describing, what was his name? George Marshall. and how much of a magnanimous character he was when he was talking with the soldier without any of the cameras on. Like, he didn't know he was being, shot or recorded or whatever. And my concern, and this is the concern of a lot of people who, spend a lot of time on the internet and just look at all the ways that things are going wrong right now, when they take a look at a lot of the people who are in charge and a lot of people who are in the back, they don't see that same honor. And I don't know if there is that honor and they're just not seeing it, how many people have that honor, and generally what would it take to restore that honor back. But that's the only reason why I would, even though I try to be as neutral as possible when analyzing this, because I don't really know what's going on ultimately, how much credence would you give to this idea that there is a lot more of this cynicism going on? And not only that, but there is a lot more, even though in, let's say, more established circles, it would be considered a faux pas to even mention something like Bohemian Grove, for instance. And as somebody who just wants to approach it very rationally, what can we say? We can say that there was that one interview that Alex Jones did with what's his name? That guy, David Gergen. So as a scientist, let's say, yes. So as a scientist looking from the outside in, what can I observe there? I can observe that Mr. Gergen admitted to there being these ceremonies that people take part in. Nixon also admitted the same thing, although he had a thing or two to say about those ceremonies as well.
I would be disappointed if there weren't.
Yes. But what I'm getting to here, Samuel, is that we already have evidence that, people who have a lot of money and power and influence meet up. Maybe it's just for frolicking around.
Look at Bill Gates.
In the
look at Melinda
robes,
Gates, what she's saying about Bill.
No, I'm sure George W. Bush played Okey Cookie with a prince of Saudi Arabia.
Sure,
I guarantee it. I guarantee it. But that's not
the important question for the American people. The important question for American people is the influence, and that's what I don't know.
Yeah, the leap is ascribing sort of puppet master competence to those kind of organizations, which they simply lack. Right? It's not. I think people gravitate to those kinds of conspiracy theories in part because. To accept the alternative hypothesis that they're just this incompetent, it almost beggars belief, right? But it's a mixture of incompetence and incentive. Because DOD can't even make a mask in a year. It's incentive alignment problems left, right, and center.
But California, at least as Adam Carolla said, it did not take them a long time at all to repair the faulty, those machines that you put the coins in for the cars. When it comes to getting people's
right?
Exactly. When it comes to getting people's money, the government is like Flash.
Right. Well, that goes to the incentive alignment problem, right? In DC, we have these automatic speed cameras, right? And they get you for like $100 ticket coming into a tunnel.
Where you have to be going is like not 10 miles over the speed limit. It's crazy.
Right. And that's an incentive problem too. Like, civil asset forfeiture, the fact that police will just take your shit and not give it back to you. That's because they can just get away with it. And there's not like, or in the case of our bigger institutions like the FDA. Why'd the FDA fail in this crisis? Why'd the CDC fail in this crisis? Well, because their incentives are such that they face different consequences from errors of omission and errors of commission. If the FDA releases a drug that leads to a death, then they are in big trouble. But if they don't release a drug that could save many lives, no one ever notices. So that those sort of asymmetries and those kind of incentive problems covered the gamut in across a lot of American institutions.
Sometimes when people do die, they don't notice. I mean, if you just look up, for example, what was it, the birth control pill in Puerto Rico? Something like that, the early...
The formaldehyde?
And thalidomide is another one. Yeah. But we have two super chats. Because but I do want to ask you about how do we... if incentivization is enough and how do we do it. But before that, Spiced for $5. Thank you, Spiced. Get John Michael Greer on stream sometime. Yeah, well, I mean, Meta Nomad's friends with him, so we're going to work on it. I do want to get John Michael Greer on.
Absolutely. And
maybe he gets a transhumanist. Who knows?
Yeah. And Cool Fat Pig donated $5. Hey, Lev, can you please tell me the Russian word for book? The Russian word for book is knizhka or kniga. or kniga. Kniga is the the more relaxed term. And also he says also Gio is incredibly handsome today.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's adorable. And
well, I'm meeting
Bob.
a lady friend late. No, well,
Ooh.
that's not a lie. Actually,
La la.
she's a friend I've had, but
nice.
And not a girlfriend, but anyways.
And last one, $20.
$20. Super Iron Bob. Thank you, my friend.
Woo!
I said it once. I said it 1,000 times. Hashtag demand better elites. Hashtag bring back noblesse oblige. And this is a response to Godward Podcast, who said that America was an experiment in replacing having a king who was supposed to check the oligarchs with laws. The law, the nomos, proved less effective in checking than a king might have. I wholeheartedly agree. And of course, but ignore the chat. Sometimes they get pretty.
Yeah. No, that's totally right. No, I think that's totally accurate. And I think if there's any sort of characterological explanation for the failures of our elites, it is that myth of meritocracy, right? There are definitely like a distribution of aptitudes, and there are people who are more competent at whatever, at the managerial kind of process. But this idea that they got there by pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, and that they don't owe anything to society or have any noblesse oblige, as you said, that's a huge problem, right? And it's and there's no countervailing power. Like in the past, it would have been unions or the church or organized parties, but those things have been totally like what technocracy means to me in the pejorative sense is not the fact that we need an EPA to like develop technocratic rules about emission standards or something like that. That's always going to be a technocratic issue because you have to like know chemistry. But it's this idea that we can delegate all political decisions to a technocratic class and remove the kind of democratic politics that is required to organize voice, right? Because the 80% of the public that has no real power, they'll never have power like individually. There's too many of them. They have day jobs. They're not paying attention. But what political parties, membership-based parties in Canada, for example, like what they do is try to channel those impulses, those inchoate demands into a platform that makes sense. You can do the same thing through organized religion, through churches that are able to sort of make collective action. The Black Church is very influential in the Democratic Party for that precise reason. Yeah.
And the Hotep Sophia could talk about how it's been rearranged. I don't know if that's the right term, Sophia, but you talk you talked to in previous episodes about what it used to be like and what it is like right now. I don't know if you're there right now, so let me know if you're there. Sophia?
She's probably...
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so she's going to be back. But real quick, before she returns, I wanted to, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I am kind of curious because it's not something that I have an answer to in my head. But when it does come to this question of incentive, like the examples that I gave of when an organization, when a government wants to get somebody's money, when there's something in it for them, then they are going to be very active and very, they're going to manage that situation really well.
Go ahead.
Well, the reason why I'm saying this, and I just want to kind of get to the bottom as much as I can. How much would you give without giving over like the whole idea of puppet masters? Because again, I understand that a lot of things are very random and chaotic, but at the same time, as far as influence goes today in the world without as much noblesse oblige, how much would be like the limit that you would give to the possibility of there being such people who do have incentive to influence people through money in a certain way that they end up, causing a lot of great changes in the world? And when you said before, people like to play the blame game, at what point would it be sufficient to actually play the blame game? Maybe we're not at that point right now, but those would be just my two questions to kind of settle that particular thing that I'm not so sure about myself right now.
I mean, what part of a lot of our institutional failures are actually stem from, in many ways, insufficient sort of hierarchy and lines of accountability, where you have these sort of like standalone administrative agencies that where even the deputy secretary or whatever is not really in charge. They can barely manage the thing, right? And that's actually a source of the problem, right? We don't even have the ability to have like puppet masters directing things because it's too decentrally organized. And you look at some of the actions that were taken during the pandemic. you contrast like a country like Taiwan, where they have much better governance around this stuff. They put someone in charge who knows, who has the competence to like coordinate shit, and they just go do it. Instead we have like, a billion different stakeholders, each pulling in different directions. Even at the level of like wealthy individuals, there definitely is some class alignment on like, what the capital gains tax rate should be. But, in many areas, our wealthiest, are pushing and pulling in different directions. Some of them are pushing really radically towards, focusing on climate change, because that's a big issue for many high net worth individuals. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Chris Hughes from Facebook.
It depends. We got China and India, and nothing's being done about them, so it seems kind of pointless.
Well, yeah, actual pollution that does destroy the environment. That seems to be not the sexiest thing compared to AGP, right? So,
right.
Carbon taxes.
There have been periods in human history where there has been a small clique of people who wielded a lot of power. Actually, the Soviet Union is an example.
Sure.
But those are actually dependent on having an institutional structure where they can wield that power, and that they have that leverage.
But wouldn't that be foundations, though? Wouldn't foundations wield a certain degree of power today as far as influencing people with money?
Oh, absolutely. And I've been pretty critical of foundations. I think here's a good example. You'll never ever see a foundation fund a think tank working on repealing the charitable tax deduction. Right. What
defeat the point?
Yeah. Canada's another example. Canada barely has a charitable tax credit. It's very, very minor. Our philanthropy is very secondary in that sense. Like, we have actual charities, but we don't have like these things that are called charities, but really are just para-political institutions, right?
Yeah. And they punish the charities at every chance they get. Being a member of Knights of Columbus myself, we get shafted all the time. We couldn't have bingo anymore and things like that.
Oh.
So yeah, there you go.
How could they do that? The monsters.
Right.
I just want to comment. I want to comment on something Samuel was saying about in America we're lacking organizational structure. I think that there is a very, very distinct organizational structure. I just don't think people know what it is. And because it's been wrapped up in conspiracy theory, when you start to explain to people that there's a group of bureaucrats who can't be fired, they just move around, they take their assignments from whoever is giving them, they don't even know who's giving them most of the time, you would say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. But it's actually an organization called the Senior Executive Service. I've talked about this before. They can't be fired. They can't, and nothing can be done without going through them. And one of the things that Trump was about to do, or actually did just before he left, and that's one thing that got really these people up in arms, is that he was going to make it easier to fire them, because up until now the code or whatever just made it in the unions or whatever just made it impossible to fire these people. It's like what was happening at the VA, but on steroids. Like, every single agency, every single department has these people. You know who they are because they'll tell you, and a lot of times they have their own flag. I mean, this is the kind of thing that does go on, but because you have so much of how things work in America, propagandized as a conspiracy, that when you start looking at, dang, how are these people staying in business? Like, how is this person making money? Like, how does this person not get fired? Because I'm from Maryland, so a lot of people I know are literally like government workers, and you're like, this person never goes to work. They're always late. They're on vacation every 5 seconds. How are they keeping their job? And a lot of the times, if they're in senior executive service, they get to keep their job. They just take vacations. Nobody cares. Nobody notices that they're gone. They retire at 55. They've been in the government 30 years, and then they go on and consult. I mean, this type of thing, if you had to live in it, like, and you see, like, a lot of my friends work for the government, like, I'm like, these people can't put 2 and 2 together. Like, I don't understand this. And me getting an advanced degree, it means nothing because I'm not a person that can be controlled per se. So I did want to bring that up. There is a structure in this country. It's just that the structure that exists has been labeled a conspiracy theory, even though you can clearly see that these government workers don't do anything, because as the government was closed for a whole year, I still got like my tax return, the stimulus still went out, the roads didn't stop, nothing stopped. So what do these, I mean, some of them were working from home, quote unquote, but like, I know these people, they weren't working if they were at home. Work is not what I would classify it as. So, it's just one of those things that's like the government works to preserve and expand its own power. And I think that's some of the things that the founders were concerned about. I consider myself I don't know what you call it, but a constitutional whatever, like that's my thing, that I sort of organize myself around. And that's different from being conservative or moderate or anything else, because when you look at the Constitution, and the Constitution, in the original document say gold and silver, and you see, this paper currency being thrown around, then that's a whole nother set of problems that has sort of come up, which is why I think for us, like I go back to this, for us, our progress would literally be regress. Like we should really just go back, like all the way back. I would be perfectly happy with that.
well, Samuel, do you have any thoughts on this committee that Sophia was talking about? Have you encountered people who are part of this committee?
You mean the Senior Executive Service?
Yes.
I might have without knowing it. As far as I understand, they're just they're kind of like liaisons between political appointees and the administrative state that are sort of outside the normal GS schedule, right? This just
they're
goes
beyond the GS schedule. Actually,
they're outside it.
Money that's
they get performance pay. And,
they're totally outside of the GS schedule.
Yeah, any effective government has to have a well-structured civil service. And this goes again to a point that there's not like method to this madness. We have a series of civil service reforms dating back decades that are sort of pasted on top of each other, and can create these kind of like fiefdoms, right? Agencies that were established to do X, and now X isn't a problem anymore, so they have to figure out what they're going to do now because they're definitely not going to get shut down. And that's I wouldn't call that a conspiracy, because like lazy civil servants is not, that's just a fact. Like it's more like a kind of political economy.
But beyond just the lazy civil servants, Buff made a comment earlier that Samuel basically said there is no overarching agenda because there are no puppet masters. So what I'm curious about here is, when I'm talking about overarching agenda, I don't mean even people like, forget the foundations for a second, because we've already discussed them. If we're just talking about, puppet masters behind the scenes, let's forget that too. Overarching agenda, in my opinion, would be, let's say, when you go on Twitter and you look at most profiles of like Gen Z kids, and you see certain things that they all have in common. They all fall in line with a certain paradigm. Same thing with people from any close circle of people. So the overarching agenda here, I could say it's kind of like a zeitgeist. It's something that doesn't necessarily have a particular person at the head, yet that does not make it any less real. So what I'm interested in finding out is whether we can kind of dissect this or exercise this particular zeitgeist to make it a little bit more familiar what exactly we're talking about here. I know Moldbug referred to it as the cathedral and so on and so forth, and I want to see how much of an effect does something like that have as opposed to just chaos.
And yes. Before we kick the foundations aside, Super Iron Bob again for $5. Can society recover from the fallout of the Gates divorce and the incoming influx of foundation manipulations? Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be funny when Melinda Gates gets to weaponize her income or her share of the Bill and Melinda Foundation. I wonder what's going to happen. I don't know. So
I was just going to say, I'm ultimately a kind of fallibilist, right? Like obviously Bill Gates is also a fallibilist, right? Because he could barely keep it in his pants. But the issue is, there are patterns that emerge that that I think elicit a lot of these sort of conspiracy theories, and those patterns are what deserve explanation. And one explanation is that we're all getting a memo saying, do this and that. Another explanation is that that there are fads and fashions, and we're mimetic creatures. And you see that all the time in foundations. Like I do a lot of work with foundations, and I can tell you whether it's Ford or Rockefeller, or the biggest ones, they are as bureaucratic as any government agency. And the people that they're bringing in and the people who run things, they have they have as much control over outcomes as like a CEO of a big company. They get a tiny sliver of the big picture, but to the extent that things look like they're being synchronized, a lot of that is just spontaneous orders. It's being driven by fads, fashions, and you call it a zeitgeist.
The discourses of
zeitgeist is a good word for it, right? Like take the 90s, like the late 90s, the kind of globalization, Panglossianism, and we're all moving towards we're going to have a North American Union, the European Union, and then we're going to merge and have one big world union. Well, a lot of that was not like being orchestrated. It was just like part of the spirit of the times, right? And I think one of the challenges is, and sort of on an individual level, one way you can think of like rationality is your ability to step outside that flow of history and take a third person perspective and not get caught up in the zeitgeist. And that's really difficult. But you don't have to ascribe any kind of like supra intention, like as if there's like one mind organism that's like marching through history. It's just
there would be more naked
unless capital is sentient itself, and then it's like a force coming from the future invading the
conformism is way more of a parsimonious explanation, right?
No, but that also makes it pretty dangerous, because then we get things like again, I don't want to say that it's, and I never compare it to Russia, because Russia today also, Russia is much worse than the United States.
Things to Russia?
Yes, but what I would say though is that as far as, let's say, having certain sides, showing certain allegiances in the public, this is something like with the various movements that are going on right now, this is something that causes a lot of self-censorship in people, and I think a lot of people are starting to see that. But at the same time, there's also this aspect, I think, of grifters coming in, politicians, a lot, grifting and politics, they go hand in hand. So when you have grifters that come in, seize upon the spirit of the times, then in a way, the comment that was made a little bit before here, I believe it was Buff talking about, having this ruling class. And again, you're talking about the opposite, that there isn't this ruling class, but in a way there kind of is, if we take the position...
Well, Bruce has been very naughty in the chat. A
hostile ruling,
hostile ruling class with a disgusting vision of how the world should be. I agree with that. That is.
I was totally going to agree with what Bruce said. Like, just that is exactly what it is. Like, it's to think or to somehow think that the ruling class doesn't have a vision that they're trying to execute. That they're literally just sort of going along with whatever is happening.
Well, but how much is that vision part of the fashion of the times, like Samuel was talking about, and how much is it not?
Well, I think it's completely orchestrated, because if you just look at the weaponization of the media, that doesn't happen by accident. And then the concert of which the media and the government and the foundations all work together, I don't really, how can you not say that there's something that's not, because if that were true, then Trump wouldn't have won in 2016. Meaning, if people wanted the government to be, the government, the media, and the foundations to all be working together and ruling our lives, then they wouldn't have to propagandize us so hard. Then there's no way Trump would have won. There's no way you'd have a Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress. There's no way you'd have a Matt Gaetz in Congress. Like, these people wouldn't exist. They would be run out of town.
Is Gaetz going to jail, or what's going on with that?
He's not going to jail. He didn't.
Well, I can actually meet in the middle.
I personally think, like, I don't know, maybe it's my paranoid conspiracy Alex Jones brain, but I think like maybe if you get into any position of power, I think inevitably they got either some dirt on you or it corrupts your soul in some way. I don't know. That's just me, maybe.
Well,
I
there could be
totally
a part of
agree
that
with
too,
that.
of course. But I can meet in the middle between Sophia and Samuel by saying the following. You guys know about the Emperor's New Clothes, right? That tale. I believe that there's a lot of naked emperors out there today, like I said before, grifters that make use of a situation. When they get into power, there are people out there who would just not be able to say no to a particular policy, and that may be a policy that would make them or their friends a lot of money. It's not like orchestrated, they force the policy down people's throats. In a way, what happened is that people would be too scared because it happens to be politically incorrect to say something bad about a certain policy, and that policy ends up getting more steam and more power, and the people who, get benefits from that, they're not necessarily kings or emperors that could call the shots de facto, but in a way they do call the shots, but not because they have some kind of magical psychic power, but because these are particular shots that people would not necessarily question today because it would be rude or it would be improper for them to question them.
I think there are two separate things, two distinct phenomena. One is preference falsification, which you'd be familiar with being Russian, right? like this idea that before the fall of the Berlin Wall, that did a survey, 90% of people would say, oh, everything's fine, but then after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there's this cascading effect where you realize, no, there maybe have been a core 10% of people who supported the regime, but everyone else was sort of going along to get along and didn't want to rock the boat. And when they felt they were able to express themselves and reveal their real preferences, there's an enormous sort of cascading effect. And I think, a lot of the cultural stuff going on right now has that kind of character where there's a core true believers of the strongest woke social justice stuff. And there's just a lot of people who kind of want to go along, get along, and they're not about to be a sore thumb. And if there are high prestige people, who start pushing back against that, there could be a cascade that also follows that. Then there's a secondary thing, which is just pure motivated cognition, right? And this is, I see this a lot being sort of next libertarian and working in libertarian think tanks where you have some true believers. You have people who are there because they read Ayn Rand or they read Hayek, but they're, they're out there advocating for tax cuts, and they only have that job because some rich guy wants his taxes cut, right? So there's you have the ability to find in the kind of demand and supply of think tankers and stuff like that. If there's somebody who's out there who really thinks that who's on Team Azerbaijan versus Team Armenia, right?
Impossible.
They truly believe that, right?
This is a pro-Armenia podcast, by the way. So
or whatever the issue is, right?
Take back Mount Ararat. Take back Mount Ararat.
So you have people truly sincerely believing things, and they're not. So in that sense, they're not cynical, but there is this tendency where we're humans and we tend to believe things are self-serving.
Well, there was one interesting point that I think Z-Man brought up. Let me just try to find it. Yeah, because of the charities in Canada, churches are forced to be run like NGOs, so pastors don't shepherd their behest of the board of directors. That's true, but also a number of pastors have gotten into trouble with the Human Rights Commission for other reasons.
That's no different than pastors here.
No, because Lev wanted to ask you, but you were busy about the black churches that came up, about whether they do serve the interests of the average African American. Can
I please talk about that? I'm sorry.
Without getting too spicy, hope to Sophia, but please go.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So this is really insanity. So I'll just talk about it in relation to what's like the corona. When everything shut down, all of the black churches shut down without question. They didn't even say a word. And my church at home is still not open. It's been over a year. So if you think that black churches are doing anything for their people, they're not doing anything. And now with them, in my area, in PG County, the churches are leading the jab drives. It's just, I don't even understand, because in the beginning people were like, oh, what about Tuskegee? And so they put out all of this propaganda saying, oh, this is going to be nothing like Tuskegee. Tuskegee. Nobody is going to get hurt. It's not possible. Okay, cool. So, but you had the churches leading the call on that. And so now you see, just the whole, I don't think there's a soul of Black people left. Like, it's very,
But to push back,
almost gone.
Yeah.
And my church is a Methodist church too, good word. So that's exactly, the Methodist churches was already dead before the incident because we were going through this whole big split. And since, it's just one of the most amazing things to watch, especially having read history. Like, I'm a historian, I'm an African-American historian, and looking at all of the things that Black people overcame to get to where we are today, and to throw it all out the window for a virus or anything else is unheard of. The people, the giants of our community are rolling in their graves. I don't ever want to hear anybody bring up MLK. Not that I'm an MLK fan, but he's rolling. He would have never, ever allowed his church to be closed for a whole year over a virus. Never, ever.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, Sophia. I mean, I think it's a very tricky issue. Me personally, I probably, unless for travel or whatever, I mean, Canada, we're different, obviously, because they're already talking about passports and all that stuff. It's very scary. I personally, I had it, I'm technically in an at-risk group because of my baggage, if you will.
Right.
You know what I mean? But when it comes to the vaccine, though, I think like the impetus is that Black people in America have been disproportionately affected from the virus because of a number of health issues that go unaddressed. And for example, Sammy, you are a policy researcher in terms of poverty. There are a number of, I personally think that what's downplayed is personal health. For example, I do truly believe that just the physiological differences, like for example, the level of vitamin D and sun exposure that in Hotep Sophia you talked about as a Black people need, that probably is
factor. Vitamin D is but so why
but then when you talk about it
saying let's have church service outside? You guys need, there's so many look at, like, little things like that they could have done.
There's a very interesting thing that I noticed, and this is, again, my mind that sometimes like to put patterns together here, but do you remember Middle Collegiate Church had recently burned down? I believe it burned down this year. It was a couple of blocks away from where I used to live in Manhattan, and the reverend of that church was Jackie Lewis, and she's it was a very woke church, like ultra woke, like pro BLM, all that stuff, rainbow flag, but the thing is that Jackie's brother is, I believe, like either a brigadier general or a major general in the armed forces. I'm not sure, but I wonder, like, I don't want to make anything big out of that, but I am curious, like, how much connections is there today between, let's say, DC, between people who are within the military as well, and a lot of these organizations, and how different is it from how it used to be back in the day?
They move in and out of them. You'll find that a lot of these major churches have friends, especially in PG County, which is literally where the government is. A lot of these people, like our old pastor, his wife, who was also somehow being paid as a pastor at my church, was a government worker. Like, they're all government workers. So they really do work at and that it's in their benefit to do what the government says for them to do, because it's also how they get paid another way. Because as a pastor, you get paid, especially if you're with United Methodist, then you get paid whatever you're making working for the government, which is 2, 3, 4 times what you're getting paid at the church. So even as far back as the turn of the century, 1900s, you had Black pastors who were getting patronage jobs with the government. This is not a new thing. This is, just something
even
that's
back in
just
the
ongoing.
New Deal, they had some in the northern states. They had like Black churches that also.
And one more thing, let me say, Super Iron Bob. College Park sign is still there, and literally they still want you to go to that bar, but it's not open. I mean, maybe it just reopened.
Oh, and speaking of Super Iron Bob, $5, another Super Iron Bob. this is amazing. Samuel, you see how much of an amazing audience we have here. So he says, anything where human choice is involved follows the power law Pareto principle, where the majority of any result is a consequence of the acts of a few. Would you agree with that?
Not as phrased. I mean, it is true that power laws show up in a lot of places. It is true that, you're never going to get rid of inequality, for example, because the rich get richer and the poor get poorer in a certain deterministic way. But that doesn't mean that, there are 10 people in a smoke-filled room deciding things. That's a very different assertion, right?
I think like even just in terms of setting the discourse is probably a more like nuanced, like. I
do think that it is interesting that social media companies like Facebook and Twitter and Google get so much attention that they get dragged before Congress to explain themselves and confess their sins. Meanwhile, mainstream media is controlled by 5 major companies.
No,
CBS,
it's 4 now. It's 4, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, CBS, Viacom, and NBC,
Disney.
Yeah, and these aren't just companies; they're conglomerates, right? Like NBC, General Electric, and these are the people.
More like NPC. Never mind.
Oh,
yes.
The funny meme.
Yeah. Well, these are the companies that took Andrew Yang off their polling, right? These are really genuinely incumbent organizations, right? They're run by people who made a bunch of money in the mid to late 20th century. Lorne Michaels is still executive producing SNL after since the 70s, right? And so my big open question is what happens in the next 20 years, because we have this big generational overhang where the people who are controlling things are drawn from a common cohort, right? The boomers. And there's a chart that shows the average age of a CEO in the Fortune 500 has gone up 14 years over 14 years. So they just the same people. They haven't left those positions to let younger people come in behind them. Likewise in academia, in the late 80s, laws were changed to make it impossible to mandate retirement. So
pretty much, yeah.
But maybe that's partly a blessing in disguise. Because look at young people today. I don't know.
That's why I stopped. Well, that's true. That's why I just stopped at the master's level, because the thought of sacrificing another 4 to 5 to 6 years of my life in academia. I mean, this is when
Thanks,
this was
Gio.
I know, but
I mean, podcasts like this are a symptom of elite overproduction, right? Like we have a lot of smart people who should be doing, who should be in positions of power in academia and government and nonprofits and so on. But it's a game of musical chairs, and the geriatrics aren't getting out of their chair. Right. And
when they get out, they just eliminate the positions. My philosophy program that I went to, not to dox myself, but it's pretty easy to find if you figure NAG region, right? I went to a pretty unique philosophy program because we had Eastern and Continental. Now they just destroyed it because 3 professors retired. And in a small department, 3 professors going that have had very long running courses that were integral to the program. I mean, of course, the business school gets all the money, right? So,
I don't know what they're doing with it. But Samuel, I wanted to make a comment on what you're saying, because I know that you don't necessarily believe that there's a group of people sitting in a smoke-filled room making decisions. But as I've been doing my research for my dissertation, something that keeps coming up, because my dissertation is on African-American entrepreneurship, and something that keeps coming up is the benevolent organizations that basically supported these up and coming Black communities. So specifically, you had a group called the Odd Fellows, which was a Black benevolent organization, and they had they made money. Their literal profit revenue model was by selling insurance. And a lot of these organizations made their money by selling insurance. And even one of the articles I just read said that there was a Black organization that was helpful in this town in Kansas, because they were there and they were all Black, they were more invested in the community's survival. So I know that, in modern days, we're being told that this is not what happened, but historical records had show it pretty clear that a lot of these up and coming communities and these up and coming towns and, all this stuff, especially when they started to move out west, was by, they had these benevolent organizations, and I don't know what else you would call them besides secret societies. I mean, maybe it's not as seedy as it's been sold to us on The Simpsons, but still, like, there's no way to get around. There's, these organizations that come together and make decisions on what they're going to do,
Yeah, but I mean, secret society is a loaded term for a club, right? And I did a lot of my own like thesis work on the rise and fall of the friendly societies and fraternity societies and stuff like that.
Oh, so
Yeah, and they sold toteens in the 1920s. Do you know about those?
Oh, all the stuff they did. Good Lord,
But those societies, I mean, they were just civil society. That's like the Knights of Columbus or anything else. And it's not that they, I was in fraternity. We had a secret handshake, but I can tell you we weren't plotting anything that profound.
Well, I think
Skull and
that
Bones.
maybe on the lower levels. I mean, this is the problem. Like,
Well, there is
in general.
There is a degree of nepotism, which is inevitable, right? So, like, have you ever wondered why, like, you name all your favorite cast members from SNL, and you find out that they're all like in the same Second City troupe, right? Like, how does that happen? Like,
Yeah.
did they just get lucky and find like 10 improv comics that were like the best of their generation, or what did one of them do really well and start getting favors for their friends from the same club, right?
Or Kamala is an AKA. Like, that's one reason why all of the educated Blacks jumped on the train is because she's an AKA. Okay, she's not Black, but who's counting? Like,
Right.
This was their soror, and that's what they followed. Like, this, if you see this type of stuff happen over and over again, you have to wonder at what point does it go from, a coincidence to, there's something else going on here.
No, but the question goes back to how much could they do? Now, let's say, sure, we have the Skull and Bones. You remember The Good Shepherd? That was a great movie, by the way, one of my favorites.
Well, no, but but Lev, I think
Bush and Carrie, like, what can they do? What is the extent to which this being in the club has any significance? Like, Samuel and Hotep Sophia would probably differ in this, but Hotep Sophia, why would you say it's significant? Well, this is very important, though. This is part of the central topic. This is part of progress. We are progressing to an understanding about what this is.
Like, how did I get my job? I got my job because I was very active on Twitter. I did lots of blogging, and when I wanted to move to the United States, I already knew people. I had a social network. I had social capital, right? And people who knew my writing and knew and liked my writing, but also over and above that, sort of had an affiliation with me and a kind of acquaintance or a friendship, and those things are everywhere, right? And it's not there's no like one secret society. It's like we're all members. There's I think a lot of this is why there were a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, was because the Jewish community was very organized and you can call it nepotism, but it's just looking out for your own. In the same way that, if you had a old school community bank, they used to make character loans, right?
But what it also comes down to for me, being a Jew, being somebody who came from Russia as a Russian Jew. No. I don't care. I don't care because I want to talk about this. So basically, like I always say, the people who, whether they're Jewish or not, who would not have the best interest of the United States and the people who live here and prosperity and family values, who don't have those interests at heart, regardless of whether or not they're Jewish or not me and not any other Jew who thinks the way that I do would ever be a part of that club. And the idea that there is some inherent characteristic to people, I just think that's absolute bullcrap, because you get people like Rousseau, who was a Frenchman, who came up with a lot of bad ideas that a lot of people started running with, and people who get into this club, regardless of whether there would be no Jews on the face of the earth, there will always be people who would go into any club and make use of that club if they have certain ways that they see the world. So this idea I find to be
at the same
ridiculous.
time, like I do think that certain, not to get like, I don't buy into a lot of it, but certain people do have certain attitudes about life. Like, for example, there is within certain more esoteric circles, and Lev, you've studied the Kabbalah a little bit. There is a certain sense of like messianism throughout. I mean, Walter Benjamin talked about this a little bit. So I think like certain ideas kind of are more appealing, not just to them, but also other people. I guess when you
if you're talking about religious groups, let's just make sure we distinguish two things here. Like we can talk about like religious, let's say Hasidic Jews, who obviously want the best for Hasidic Jews, just like a Muslim caucus would want the best for their particular
or the Mormons or the Hungarians or the Canadians. I run into a Canadian. We have an instant.
But if we're talking about policies that would affect not a particular religious group, but would be overarching policies that would determine what kind of entertainment we watch or, how American society functions as a whole, that is somewhere where you have people who are Jewish, who are on all kinds of, parts of the spectrum. You have people like Ludwig von Mises on one hand, and then on the other hand, you would have Leon Trotsky,
Lev, I would say, because it's not the Judaism, it's the Zionism. There's a totally different structure. But I'm just saying, like, I know a lot of these people they happen to be Jewish, but Jewish is a religion, like a practice.
But even there, if we're talking
religion.
But even there, though, Sophia, if we're talking about Israel, I'm not going to open up this can of worms because I know that is a can of worms. But all that I'm going to have to talk to you a little bit later on. We're going to have to talk in private. I want to give you some more information.
Is this podcast called Just Asking Questions? Did I come on the wrong show?
Yes, that's the secret name for it. But anyway, no. What I want to get to here is that if we're talking about
I wanted to actually get back to the progress thing, but also poverty. I wanted to
real quick talk
about that.
If we're talking about the interest that people would have in a particular country, that I see in no way playing, let's say, to the interests of, to make it worse for any other country if we're just talking about, like, defending Israel, and that's that. Now, people could make broad statements afterwards, and I'd be happy to discuss this with you at another time. But the point being, once again, is that regardless of where a person is from, they end up, if they are a square peg, they're going to fill into the square hole. The square peg, in this case, being their worldview, how they see America, how they see, what people should aspire to, and how people should be, whether people should be run more by government intervention as opposed to letting people be more independent. There are people who, because of, the things that they were taught as a child, they were born and they get used to certain ways of being based on the schooling that they get. There's a lot of progressive, quote-unquote progressive New York schools that are getting absolutely wokenized, and a lot of parents right now, thanks to people like Barry Weiss, are starting to speak out. Yes, are starting to speak out against this. So my whole point is, again, we have people on different parts of the spectrum from different places, and I'm going to judge people not by any characteristic of where they were born or what color their skin is or anything like that. I am going to judge people by what they bring to the table.
I think the problem is, like, I mean, the way... The unfortunate part is that the people who are standing in opposition to sort of a lot of the current orthodoxy, like, let's say that James Lindsay's the world. That's a good example. Okay. It seems that we always, on the podcast, we mention Barry Weiss, you have to mention James Lindsay. He's like, I don't know why, it just happens. God wills it. When they talk about the way, like, all these schools are getting wokeified, and it's like this very, like, invasive force that is, like, quantifiable, like, a property that you can, like, say it's kind of like a cancer cell that you have to cut out. To me, like, I think things are a bit more nuanced in that it's ignoring, like, trends that have been going on in general. And even if you were to, like, separate, like, the ultra progressive, I would say, like, radical liberal politics, there's still a lot of other factors at play. Just for example, the way, like, you mentioned universities, the way that, like, it's become, like, commodified, it's become sort of like a corporate model. I mean, it's true, like, that the universities overwhelmingly, like, are stifling when it comes to setting the agenda. But at the same time, there's these other forces that the James Lindsays, the Ben Shapiro's of the world don't really talk about that do contribute a great deal as to why all of these institutions at once are sort of beholden to certain political fads or moods. I mean, even just like... Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add, as a Native American, a person who's from America, I would just like to add, like, my perspective on that, because I think that because America has sort of, like, always been a blend willingly or unwillingly, however you describe that.
Yeah.
But it's much different to it's much more different or easier to just put people in groups and identify the groups together and to say, oh, these people are like each other based on whatever characteristics you have. And I think that because America has been infiltrated or colonized by so many people who don't have a historical tie to America, they bring along with them the stuff from their other countries. So I think that's where you have this huge introduction of
now every local,
hating this group, hating that group, whatever.
Every local conflict becomes international,
really, exactly, because that's not really an American thing per se. I mean, there's lots of things that are American, but I don't think that dividing and conquering people based on where they're from per se is like a thing that you would find as a common thread among Americans, which I always try to remind people that there is a difference between Americans from America, black and white, and blacks specifically who are not from American, who are not American lineage. These two groups of people, especially related to blacks, cannot be compared, not the same.
They have a different experience. Yeah.
If you have this fool on the show, tell me. I want to be on my best behavior, but
they do have a different experience. But then again, this try.
But I think it goes to why racialization hasn't been a very productive shift in the discourse, right? Because it covers up all these ethnic differences, which are not racial at all, right? Like you're saying, Hotep Sophia. Like I know, Nigerian immigrants who are some of the most red-pilled people I've ever met.
Totally different, but they are totally different from Ghanaians, because I know a lot of Ghanaians, they're not super red-pilled. There are people liberal,
right.
It's just different.
Race is not the right ontology, I don't think.
There are people, though, who I don't want to mention his name because he's pretty controversial. Tariq Nasheed, people like that. I know he's like totally sensationalistic, but there are a lot of people that do say that in America, they want to, rather than affirm what was before, like, for example, with the Nation of Islam stuff, they wanted to sort of like affirm their own identity as Black Americans rather than sort of going back to a very fragmented relationship to their
and
African
who doesn't
ancestry,
want
right?
that?
So,
like Africans don't want that. I mean, Islanders don't want that. They don't want Black Americans to be rooted in their Black American identity because it leaves them off the group. They get left off the list. If you are an African from Africa, you need to be on a different list as Black Americans. That's why I advocate for going back to the term of Negro to describe us, because that's the only way you could get around all these other groups like Brits or like Islanders being looped in with Black Americans like me, who I know, I know 10 generations of my family from Maryland on both sides. Like, there's no getting around it. I'm an American as an American. So, and then when you say to like the people who don't like America, then they're like, oh, you're Black. No, you're a person of color. No, I'm not a person of color. I'm an American. I'm a Black American, but I'm an American. So, and then when you go overseas, no matter what, oh, you're American. They can spot Americans from a mile away.
Yeah, they even know.
Don't understand Americans are Americans. It's here. It's crazy.
But then that goes back to the central question of if the American view of things of having a popular myth that holds all of these different disparate groups together, if that's just going to become further another fiction, or if it still has a sort of animating spirit, because that's sort of the idea of progress is sort of equated with Americanism as being the shining rock on the hill or whatnot. Is that a total fantasy, or do you think that still has some life in it to both Hotep Sophia and well, I mean, you, Lev, also, and Samuel, but also I wanted to get into poverty, because this is an issue I myself am interested in. but let's talk about that first before we
Yeah.
get into Sam's specific work. So,
And by the way, I noticed that I accidentally muted myself for a particular portion. I'm not sure what I muted myself on.
yeah,
but
believe
again,
me, believe me, Em, I do wish sometimes that I could probably mute Lev. I had that ability.
Ah,
but-
yeah.
I'm kidding.
Oh.
Oh,
If only.
If only.
No, you're not that lucky, Gio. But anyway, no, I just want to say again, in case this part was muted, and maybe not, I don't care. But again, my policy, open door for anybody who wants to come in as long as they get to a certain level where they can vibe with the people that they want to
Well,
be
we have disagreements
in
with
the
that, Lev, but
vicinity
that's-
of. But what's the other choice? Like, that's the thing. I really don't see what the other choice here is, because we're an interconnected society. You know, unless we're going to go back to the Dark Ages or Middle Age, whatever you want to call it. You know, we're connected. We got airplanes. We got trains. We got the internet. So the best that I can come up with us handling here is to just have like a certain rule as far as you have to, regardless of where you're from, if you can get to that level. And I think that works for everybody, because the people that would complain about any group of people where they say, well, this group of people is so and so and so. Well, then if people from that group of people come there and act in a different way and would actually be known ahead of time. I'm not sure how this could be. I'm sure this could be possible. I don't think it's that hard to figure out like whether they would be able to fit in. Then great. Then that argument goes out the window. Then if they are able to fit in, if they treat their kids the same way you treat your kids, and if they bestow upon their kids the same level of wisdom that you bestow upon your kids, then you've already got something there, you know? And there are places around the world
move
that
on.
are different when it comes
We're
to that.
straying from the.
Yeah. I know, but I just wanted to get that out just in case I got muted at that part. I don't care. Okay.
I do have something to say on this. I think, like if you look at what Americans mean by multiculturalism when they talk about it favorably or not favorably, what they really mean is a kind of monoculturalism. Like they're actually saying, adopt this sort of like very waspy Protestant view of assimilation, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think it contrasts. It's something that as a Canadian you pick up on because it is a bit different than our approach in Canada. Growing up in Nova Scotia, for instance, I knew a German from a Gaelic person, right? Like we knew it from their last name. We had there's actually Gaelic language schools, or going out west. Partly this is a byproduct of the fact that we have a big French-speaking part of the country, literally New France, and they were and that contrasts with the English-speaking part of the country, both white, both European, but very culturally different, right? And so our version of multiculturalism in Canada has been much more pluralistic in the sense that it's more a mosaic than a melting pot, that we recognize.
And there's problems with that. I'm a critic of our.
There are
experiment,
definitely problems of it, but I think
But in America, it's
the kind
We'll
of
take some
the kind of
like
unhyped
Italians, for
yeah,
instance, like Gio's Italian. Oh, go on.
I was going to say
Right.
like the myth of like the unhyphenated American, right? Like that we're all
Yeah.
going to come here and assimilate. That worked for the Scots Irish, but but we don't want everyone to become just this hodgepodge.
Sure.
This sort of, we want people to retain part of their.
But
it
there is a
worked
certain
too well
standard,
for us
though.
Italians, unfortunately. Like when us Italians, when we became white people, that was a total disaster for us. That's
Well,
my opinion.
I would
to
say
add
that-
it.
Oh,
Yeah,
go
go
on.
ahead.
I'm
Yes.
just gonna say that actually unhyphenated American did not even apply to Irish until like
Yeah,
almost the
that's
80s.
right.
Yeah.
Like
That's right.
it's the
Yeah.
craziest thing.
Gangs
Like
of New
they
York.
weren't like white. That's why I always say like, how can you? What is even white? Like why even do that to people? Because especially in America, because people do know their lineage and their history, and so to just group them all together based on skin tone now when they've been black or whatever
Right.
all the way up until that point is kind of like pure insanity. And I have to like when I have conversation with black people, I have to say like, what do you mean by white? And almost 100% of the time they really mean rich. Like, so then say rich people,
Well,
say
lost,
the elites,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like you don't mean white people. Like
No.
use the
Appalachians.
proper
But at the
term.
same time, to play devil's advocate, I do think that because white people in North America are so heavily mixed that people in general, and black people as well, are just fundamentally disconnected from their roots in general, that I think that over a process of time, not just assimilation, but it's kind of a tricky thing to say, because then you don't really want to import ethnic conflicts, which is happening in Canada and America. But at the same token, it's like, it's kind of a shame that people do lose their identity, and with it they lose their capacity for sort of communal belonging with it. For example, in the cities,
that's by design. That's by
exactly
design.
Yeah, the
you know
cities,
what I
for
mean?
instance,
like,
the white flight, that was almost purposefully by design.
But it's
to
also
like
a question of what,
take people
what
from
do we
the urban
want to...
ethnic ghettos and like put them in the suburbs, right? So that's like, yeah.
No, but the question for me is, what do we want to assimilate and what don't we? Italian food, keep it. I love Italian food. Gio loves Italian food. Let's keep that. But let's say the standards of education at the Catholic school that I went to, by the way, I went to a Catholic school. What standards did they emulate? They emulated the standards, the root of which you could also see in the WASP schools and in, French Lyceum or whatever you want to call those schools. There is still a certain standard that those schools met as far as a certain amount of rigorous education that kids had to undergo. So my whole
but even
is,
like education in America, like that's another, like with the
of
Prussian
course,
school
now.
system, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, that's
but at least
issue.
I know Prussian, I get it, but at least there was a certain standard that was expected of the immigrants, like the Russians, Jewish, Irish,
Ukrainian,
Italian,
Polish.
Ukrainian. Yeah, there was a standard that they had to meet. My whole thing is, I never want to exclude anybody and say because you happen to be from here you cannot meet the standard. I want the standard to be harder, and I think people can meet it.
It depends what the standard is of, right? Like what? So I would distinguish between integration and assimilation, right? So a good example of this in the Canadian context, in the late 90s, there was this controversy because Canada has a pretty sizable Sikh population, and Sikhs wear turbans, and
Seek and you shall find.
They wanted to, some Sikh person wanted to join
the Royal Canadian Mounted
the RCMP, and the RCMP wear those goofy hats, so they had to change the rules, and there's this big debate whether they should change the rules. And I would say that was good that they changed the rules and let a Sikh person wear their turban, because that to me is how you get civic integration. You accommodate people's cultural particularity in the common civic institutions, and that over the longer run actually leads to more assimilation, because people feel comfortable coming out of their enclaves and being part of society. What people push back against is when you force a cultural assimilation to adopt our mores and so on. That actually can often backlash and cause people to turn insular and withdraw from public and from civil society.
Yes and no.
Well, let me add one thing real quick, Samuel. I'm sure you know this, that Brown versus Board of Education literally was not about integration. The Blacks did not want integration. That was the NAACP forcing their social programming onto this Black community, forcing integration. Blacks wanted separate but equal. They just wanted the same funding as the white schools, which is exactly what they asked for. But in order for the NAACP to maintain their to keep up this lawsuit or whatever, they forced them to change what they wanted. So Blacks, a lot of people, I only say that because there's a huge group of people who like to blame this stuff on Blacks all the time, but I'm like, it's not us. We didn't want it either.
But I would say
we were perfectly fine with separate, but
yeah.
There's a great paper by Joseph Heath on this called Two Dilemmas for Race Relations in the U.S., where he tries to make this point very explicit to say, there are these two different models. There's the kind of Canadian mosaic multicultural model where you can call it polynational. Like, we don't have one nation, we have multiple nations within one country.
Well, now we're a post-nation, so according to Trudeau, right? So yeah.
And then there's the kind of Singaporean model where it's everyone is integrated by quotas, where you have a Malay and Indonesian and a Chinese, Han Chinese, all living in the same apartment by forced integration. And one analysis of U.S. race relations is that we've been caught in these incompatible imperatives. There's one approach you would take if we wanted to treat it as a polynational community, and to say that this ethnicity is its own coherent thing, and we want them to have their own institutions and cultural coherency, or we're going to take an assimilative model as if they're an immigrant community, which African Americans aren't, because they've been here longer than most white settlers. And so, like you're saying, Hotep Sophia, there's different elements that are pulling in these different directions that are mutually incompatible, right? We can either go full integration, or we could have, well-funded historically Black colleges, universities, and have recognition of Black cultural achievement and their contribution as qua African Americans, or we could try to do the same thing we did for the Irish and Italians, but that's not going to work, right? And people don't want that, right? People want to maintain part of their cultural identity, and until we understand that we have these incompatible imperatives, we're sort of in a Chinese finger trap, then we're always going to be circling around these same debates.
But we're in the Chinese finger trap right now with the things that are going on with China, but that's a whole other...
I have a story about that real quick. I'm sorry. Just to piggyback off what Samuel said, this is, my mom went to University of Maryland, and at the time,
wait, Hotep, are you a Baltimorean, by the way? I know
I'm from PG County. No, I'm from PG County.
So
I'm a Southern Marylander.
Wow.
At the time when she went there, they had gone to every Black high school in the state because they were going to lose their funding. So they had to go around to all the schools, and they accepted every single Black person who would come, literally every single one. Then flash forward, I went to Maryland for my undergrad, and in our dorms, literally, there was always a Black, a white, and an Asian, or a Black, a white, Hispanic. They literally forced integration so bad. I mean, there were so many problems. I can't even put into words. You were very, very lucky if you came to campus already knowing who your roommate was going to be, because there were literally so many problems, because the difference between a Black, a white, and an Asian, and a Black, a white, and Hispanic, there are huge, huge differences. And so the University of Maryland solution to this was literally let's throw them all in one room and see what happened. And it was a disaster. So what you're saying is exactly right. They've been trying this, and it's not working. It's worse now than it was.
But at the same time, I mean, for example, I know and I don't live there, thank God. But Toronto, for instance, it's
Toronto the good.
Well, the thing is it's getting worse in terms of having people just going within their own ethnic ghettos, and there's not really a lot of opportunities of integration. But at the same time, I mean, there's different levels, obviously, of why that is detrimental or beneficial. I know in Montreal and Quebec in general, it's a very controversial thing with the niqab ban. I understand kind of their. I don't agree with it, but I kind of understand they have a huge Muslim population. But when it comes to the Sikh turban thing with the Mounties, to me that was at the time that was such a ridiculous debate, because literally the Sikhs were fighting alongside Canadian. Well, we were all the British at the time, Canadian British soldiers in the turban in World War II. So it's it's good enough for them to be in the army to fight and die. And by the way, a lot of Sikhs people don't know this, but the Sikhs, a lot of them had massive casualties in World War II in certain campaigns, fighting alongside British Canadians. So that, to me, that was kind of a spurious thing. Same with the kirpan. People don't know it's the little knife that they wear.
They can bring that into school, by the way.
Yeah.
The only
no, but it's sealed. No, but it's they can't take it out. It's sealed with.
Yes, they can.
No, yes, they have to seal it with yarn. They
no,
can't.
But it's isn't it to stab somebody?
It's a ceremonial thing.
Hold on, I gotta look this up.
It has to be sealed within the bandolier. What do they call it? The sheath. They can't take it out. That's the only way that they've let them do that. And I think a lot of them don't even have the physical knife. It's just a symbolic thing. So that's another thing. But this idea of, I wanted to get to the poverty thing, but just really quickly, I guess when it comes down to it, there's a lot of problems with the equation of the American century, the American ideal, with progress itself, but also what people mean by progress, because it seems that we've had this sort of neoliberal thing with equating the metric of material wealth that is simply on paper. And this came up with the Mark Terrell thing again, with the actual well-being of the American populace, not just the American populace, but also any country developing or developed. it seems that like even just like for example in the developing world, I mean we were going to have a guest from South Africa, but then they have rolling blackouts, so he couldn't make it. But like that idea, like the Washington Consensus that came from the 70s and 80s, that's another big thing. Like the alleviation of global poverty, has it alleviated, at least on paper, materially, maybe, you know, but when it comes to a lot of these other issues that, you know, by basically letting these corporations invade these very vulnerable people through the Washington Consensus, I know it's sort of like a Noam Chomsky type of point, but it is true. I mean, even just the idea of America exporting its quote unquote good to the rest of the world, I mean, that led to all of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that's still continuing to this day by other means. I'm just rambling right now, but it seems that there's no surefire way to import the idea of progress to other people without a lot of like, you know, very ghoulish and evil things happening as a result. I don't know.
Well, there was a quick thing I wanted to also touch on. If you take a look at France, for a long time was not like the nation of France. There were people who spoke French that were in semi-isolated communities that had their own culture. Today, you could say that there are still, at least my dad found that like the people in southern France are kind of asshole-ish, you know, too snooty. But the whole thing here is that you still have people, let's say, like Dumas, who wrote Three Musketeers, Count of Monte Cristo. I bet that a lot of French people would say that they are proud of Dumas and Dumas' accomplishments, even if, let's say, the culture that he is from may not necessarily be the one with, like, southern France or northern France or however, I don't exactly know where exactly he's from. But the point is that I could see a similar thing with America, where I think we are living in a time of a lot of low culture, whether it's just the internet and the lowest common denominator or whatever, but I could still see there being a certain, let's say you were asking before about like how can we define what this threshold is that people can meet. Like, we can honestly say something like Alexander Dumas for France, something like for England, Shakespeare, something like for Spain, Cervantes. We can see literary giants, or Pushkin in Russia. We could say literary giants, and I'm just touching about literary works here, but we could see literary giants within these different nations that people are proud to associate, kind of like associating with a certain demigod. We associate ourselves with this demigod, they were able to contribute a lot. My whole thing is, there are different parts of America that are not like each other, you know, whether it's the Mormon parts, whether it's the southern parts, northern parts. My whole thing is, let's get everybody to a higher level so that they'll be able to meet the same threshold as the threshold was that ended up producing such people as Shakespeare and Dumas and Pushkin and so on and so forth. I mean, I think that's reasonable. I don't know.
I'm for it.
There we go. I'm glad you are for it. And I think this brings us to, yes.
Well, when we talk about Samuel's own work, is that the next?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's do it.
This has been a lot of my own work. I nominally direct poverty welfare, but you know, a lot of my work is around industrial policy, trying to spur, you know, manufacturing rebirth, kind of you know, I want a new renaissance, basically.
But do you think that? But do you think, like we've talked about this too on the show? Do you think that the vision of, like, what would you say, like, you know, and I know, well, he's one of my favorites of the regionalists, but let's say the Thomas Hart Benton painting version of America of, like, you know, you go into the post office and there's like the workers and the farmers and the industrialists, and it's like you know, Jigga Chad, like with the plans, you know, those ones, right? Do you think that, like, this vision of a new renaissance in America, or a new sort of approach to labor itself, that we could somehow recapitulate? And I'm talking about North America in general, because where I live in, near Niagara Falls, my town was a very industrial town. And we were sort of progressively stripped off and offshore during the 80s, during the, you know, the Mulroney reign. And, you know, my father remembers, because there was all paper mills around here, my father remembers like going to sleep at night and seeing like an orange glow in the air in the 60s. But that wasn't a good part of it, by the way. That was terrible. That was pure pollution. But when it comes to like reindustrialization, I know Trump was big on this. I don't know. I don't see the economic incentives there to like take corporations from China, for example, or Taiwan or wherever, and like having like American workers do that. I don't really, to me, it seems just like another like romanticism of a particular time in the American Renaissance. I don't know.
No, that's true in many of its expressions, right? So like Trump's was definitely a very nostalgic approach that we're just going to try to bring back the jobs that
and the
we
Sanders
lost,
one
right?
as well, right? So.
Right, and that's just simply not viable, right? Like, you look at countries like Germany that have maintained their manufacturing base. They've done it through continuous investments in human capital and moving up the value chain. You know, they're not staying static, and they're investing in a wide variety of human capital, right? Not just college educated knowledge workers, but skills and apprenticeships and trades. Yeah, and it is tragic. I have a post on this that your viewers might like called "The China Shock Doctrine," where I talk about the China shock and its and the kind of phenomena of people on the right sounding like they're Naomi Klein talking about the shock doctrine.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we've embraced a sort of form of anti-capitalism, so I think that's.
Here we go. I'm going to post a link to it. It's on National Affairs. Mm-hmm. Here we go. So, and I look forward to reading this. But my question when it comes to China...
Listen, I don't like Naomi Klein. I thought she cringed herself in the last 5 years. But No Logo, yeah. But No Logo was a pretty good book, I gotta say. No Logo was...
But even that, no, I like the book Rebel Cell by Joseph Heath and Andrew Potter. That book is phenomenal. It's sort of an attack on No Logo as misdiagnosing the problem. And going to actually what we were talking about earlier, sort of focusing more on sort of incentives and collection action problems and stuff like that. Because, you know, she would like, you know, in No Logo brag about being in, you know, a remodeled, refurbished loft in like central Toronto, right? Like something super like, yes, it wasn't like the McDonald's of apartments, but it was actually like even more socially distinctive and cool, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of Bobo's in Paradise sort of a misdiagnosis. Like the people who walk around with No Logo shirts on are actually the real people wearing the logos.
Bourgeois, yeah.
Well, I have a question about China and jobs. So I may be wrong about this, but there seems to be an awful lot of very cheap, crappy stuff that comes out of there that breaks down. And if people were to act less like grasshoppers and more like ants storing for the winter, they'd invest, which would be cheaper for them, in products that would last a lot longer that would be manufactured here. And also I see robotics as being something that could potentially change a lot of things when it comes to a lot of the problems we consider today, as far as, you know, for better or worse, whatever's going to happen with jobs. Like, where do you see there being a possible change of heart now that we're seeing the situation with the Wuhan lab and China and all that there may be a certain change of heart in decision makers, or at least it would get to such a point that Americans would have enough of this and they would understand that it may make sense much more to invest in higher quality American-made goods so that we do not depend on this, you know, the situation that I kind of see as being kind of like a reverse of what England did to China with the Opium Wars. You know, like with all of this cheap products going here and ourselves just being, you know, the parody being like a bunch of burgers sitting down and doing drugs and not doing anything and just like letting this Promethean ingenuity pass us by. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I talk about in the piece, you know, why, you know, there's a interview of Tim Cook in 2017 where he's asked, you know, why do you do your manufacturing in China? And he says, you know, I think the quote is here, the popular conception is that companies come to China because of low labor costs. I'm not sure what part of China you go to, but the truth is China stopped being low labor costs many years ago. The reason we come to China is from a supply point of view is skill and the quantity of skill in one location and the type of skill it is. The products we do require advanced tooling. The kind of tooling skill here is very deep. In the US, you could have a meeting of tooling engineers, and I'm not sure we could fill the room. In China, you could fill multiple football fields. And you know, that goes to you know, China's efforts, successful efforts at building domestic manufacturing capacity and that kind of skill. You know, we took a more laissez-faire Ricardian approach where we were just sort of, you know, let water run downhill and see what happens. And we're kind of living the consequences because we know from you know, mainstream textbooks that it is true that your country, if you just do nothing, will pursue its comparative advantage. And in our case, that is people in law and finance and these other creative jobs that are globally integrated services. but only are, within reach of like the top 20%.
Yeah, that leaves so many people out.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty bad. It's
so in many ways, the classic Ricardian advice to specialize, you specialize in trade, is actually the exact opposite of what you want to do. You want to diversify, right? You want to maintain a lot of aptitudes and a lot of human capital and a lot of different, a wide range of goods and services, and not become so hyper specialized. That can work for like Singapore or Hong Kong, right? Because then they become like the neoliberal trading post. But for a country as big as the United States, you can't just have everything be like done out of Wall Street or the Bay Area.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, do you see there being? Go on.
I just want to have one comment. I sort of disagree with Samuel on the fact that manufacturing shouldn't be brought back to America, because I think the advances in technology and the ongoing shipping issues, I'm in logistics, so that's going to be an ongoing issue. So in order to get around that, I just saw today that like Peloton is moving their production to America. So I think that some things can be made in other countries, but I think if we put, like you said, more emphasis into development of our capital and our resources within the 3D realm and the other actual production, techniques, I think we would have a much better solution. But there's no money in that. So that's the reason why we're still going with this sort of old perspective of even how manufacturing works. Because if you look at some of the stuff that they can do with the 3D printers, I mean, it's nothing like how it used to be. It totally. Doesn't even have to be. You know what I mean?
I mean, just to clarify what I meant when I said bring back. I'm very pro supporting American manufacturing and trying to build it back up. But I'm not. What I meant is I don't want to bring back what we lost. Like we don't need to bring back the furniture manufacturers in North Carolina. Because like that ship has sailed. Like manufacturing furniture is not going to be, we're too beyond that. And if you look at examples around the world and in history of countries that have redeveloped and not necessarily protected existing jobs, but allowed those jobs to be replaced by similar jobs with similar skill sets and higher value exports and stuff like that. They do it not by being nostalgic for the past and wanting to bring back the steel mills or something like that. They do it by trying to look ahead and capture parts of the market that no one owns yet, right?
It seems like the jump off period, I mean, excluding the 1990s, because that was like, that was a time warp that'll never come back ever again, unfortunately. Depending on where you are. If you were in Eastern Europe, then probably your experience is different. But let's say from the late 70s to the mid 80s, the Reagan era, put it that way. It seems that the jump off period from deindustrialization, offshoring, the Paul Volcker economic model, there was really the retraining of people and the sort of restructuring of America, apart from Silicon Valley, but even still, that's, not for the average person. That it seems like that was just left in the wind because like a bunch of people at the top were making money, and so like they thought the trickle down thing was going to work, and I don't know, like it just seems the 80s was like a period of unknowing, I guess.
Well, it's also there's also a time consistency problem, like they say, where often with these trade deals, what would happen is we knew that there would be disruption, and so we would tack on a provision to, boost funding for the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program or something like that, right? A super narrow ad hoc program that you can only get into if you can demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that you lost your job due to imports, right? But like, why restrict it to imports? What if you lost your job due to automation? What if you lost your job due to changes in demand? Like the experience of losing your job and the need to retrain is not exclusive to like trade disruptions. And so rather, if you look at countries like Denmark, for example, very globally integrated, very strong export market, very big manufacturing economy. They don't have like parochial programs for people disrupted by trade. They have continuous education for everybody. And the way they determine whether you're eligible is whether you lost your job and are having difficulty finding a job, not why you lost your job, because that doesn't matter.
But it's also a very small country and pretty well integrated as far as people being on the same page.
Yeah, and in America, like for instance, the military becomes a job program, which is kind of terrifying actually. Like all these poor kids from either like Baltimore or the Appalachians, it's like they're, you know what I mean? Like
they're not going to be doing it anymore. They're running them out. I don't know.
That size point is really important. Because in many ways, like the U.S. was complacent because we could afford to be complacent because we were a quarter of the global economy. Yeah. So just our size shielded us from shocks, and to the extent that there were shocks, they were very regionally concentrated. So you wouldn't get national attention. And I think if there's any like broader theme to my thinking about where we're headed in the 21st century, is like the rise of China and everything else is revealing America to be a small open economy, and with the political economy that comes with that, where we can be affected by global trade winds and by things like a global pandemic, and that we're not invulnerable, right? And that our economy and our government and our politics are therefore shifting to look more and more like we see in other small open economies in Europe and in other parts of the world.
Oh my God, that's kind of terrifying, actually. I don't know.
We have a comment here. We have a comment here from Buff. Re-educating a truck driver to be a logistics worker is not the great achievement you think it is. So, I mean, we had another comment before that from Super Iron Bob, who was talking about how Germany has apprenticeships, for example, and here we don't. I really see, like, when I take a look even at the faces of a lot of these so-called teachers that are in our public schools, we see them on the Zoom calls. These are dinosaurs. They're on their way out. I don't know how much students could even stand these people anymore.
The problem is the dinosaurs are actually probably the good ones. The younger ones I got to worry about. That's
no. I mean dinosaurs not in terms of age. I don't want to be ageist. I mean dinosaurs in terms of the institution. The institution of education as it is right now, I see it as not being something that's going to last for a long time, nor do I see 3TR,
it's a bubble in America.
Like, by the way, Samuel, you were talking about how there is like an overabundance of people like us who would be able to, like, if there was more opportunity, get a job at some, whatever decision-making thing. I disagree, and here's why. Because I love my freedom. I love the fact that we have this pirate ship here where we can steer the conversation into places where we want to go. And in a way, I see this as being the real future of media right here, not the media operations that we currently have. So I see both education and the establishment media as being dinosaurs. And my hope is that once the floodgates open up to more decentralized education, to more apprenticeship programs, then the real potential of the American people will be able to show itself and is going to kick China's butt.
I need to piggyback off of that, Samuel. I'm completely unemployable by any standard of consideration. I am working on my doctorate, but it is literally not possible for me to be employed because I cannot go along with the plan that some university gives me on each kids about entrepreneurship, because it just won't work for me. And I've been like this my whole entire life, which is why a lot of my friends work for the government, and I never worked for the government because I could never just answer the questions like on the test. Like it just be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to answer these questions and I'm going to get this job. I would be like, I don't know what my scores came back, but they always came back, no, don't hire her. She's going to tell on us. She's going to write us out for whatever stuff we're doing that we're not supposed to be. So there are, I think, a growing group of people like us who are just like,
but I would like to
tell the truth.
And the problem too, Hotep Sophia, is that when it comes to like sort of, it's very interesting being someone from more of like, I'm not going to like say that I'm totally working class, but coming from a construction background, it's very interesting how when it comes to sort of a lot of positions within academia, but also the culture in corporations and in more traditional white collar stuff, the contemporary world, for instance, which in my opinion is no different than academia now. There is a certain personality and there's a certain type and there's a certain selection of people who fit a mold. And a lot of them happen to be what would you call, the upper like bourgeois classes. And so the experience of people coming, like I remember Justin Murphy talked about this, the experience for people coming from a sort of blue collar background into academia through their, for some, reason, the wirings got crossed and they got interested in, with Justin, it was a Deleuze and Guattari. So it's like something there. It's very different, but I would say, but then what happens when there's even more graduates, there's even more elite overproduction, that and there's less positions, obviously. It seems to me that America, like, there's a lot of separate bubbles that are going to burst, that are going to impede any sort of grand vision of progress that people have. Like even just poverty, which is something I'm very interested in, the poverty rate and how it's going up, but also like just deaths of despair and suicides. And
but at the same time, we also look at animals in a different way. I think we look at, for example,
how'd you go from poverty to animals?
No, because I see that in the human psyche, something that Hotep Sophia was alluding to in the very beginning when I first asked her how she defines progress. I think we are starting to look at other like sentient life as there being a gradation of consciousness, at which point, for example, who don't we kill? We don't kill, like, we don't eat cats, we don't eat dogs.
Thing, yeah.
Yeah, and in a way, I do see that as being, like, at the same time that things are a little bit frazzled right now with all the changes that are going on, I do see, like, to give the due to some of the social justice warriors, I do see there being a kind of, like, an idea that we do have to be moral stewards of the planet, and it comes out in very ugly ways. But I wonder if right now we are kind of in a transition where I don't believe all we have to look forward to is just the great cycle of history. I see it as a spiral instead. I see it as cycles where certain things that were introduced to us as challenges are things that we can overcome, and otherwise, what do we have? We have a great civilization, then ends up getting conquered, dies away, and then another civilization blooms like a flower. This has been going on for thousands of years. Now I think things are getting a little bit differently. And while I'm not talking about a utopia, I am seeing somewhat of a psychological change going on in people that I think may result in something quite unexpected, but only time will tell. I don't know, Samuel, do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, the only certainty is change, and I think this next century is going to be unpredictable in a lot of different ways. You could whether it's the demographic overhang ending, whether it's decentralized finance and artificial intelligence and these other innovations. I do think that if there's any like big broad theme, it's that we have a set of high modernist institutions that are don't have a direction of fit with the modern technological environment, and those institutions are going to have to adjust. And if they don't adjust, they'll break. So we'll see places where they break and places where they adjust. And my preference is that they adjust as much as possible, because breaking is, the revolution is never as clean as you hope.
You hear that? You hear that? That's a very important point that Samuel just said.
Well, there's a good comment by Daniel Tracht. Yeah.
Tracht.
I don't know what the correlation between a worker's autonomy and productivity is. I imagine it would be highly heterogeneous across industries and locations. Do you have an idea about this, Samuel? So I guess he's saying, different industries will produce different sort of levels of autonomy and productivity. And like even the metric of productivity is sort of, I guess that's what he's saying.
I mean, my job is highly autonomous, and I'm not very productive at all. I'm talking to you guys for the last 2 hours.
There you go. Yeah.
No, that's the opposite. That's extremely productive. This is the butterfly that flaps his wings and causes revolutions to happen around the world.
Okay, so it's counterproductive. All right.
Yes. No. Well, good revolutions. Revolutions of the mind. Inner revolutions.
But I think it is kind of like, it is strange how the majority of like even something like intellectual discourse is being mediated by like a patronage, like a sort of return to a patronage system.
Yeah, patreon.com/break the rules.
Oh, there you go, right? And we'll go through the tiers after. But it's sort of like, that's, I think like the age of like the creative industries are over, and like the era of like going back to traveling minstrels, like each, internet traveling minstrels, whether you're an animator or you're a podcaster or an, God forbid, an artist like myself.
That
And
has
it's
to
like,
be the word of the
you know,
day. Internet traveling minstrels. Like,
Yeah.
I have to find a way
Sort
to
of-
use that.
well, because what other option is there, right? Like, that's the thing.
Make
Like, there's,
them laugh. Make them laugh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where's your hot tub, Gio?
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, Lev, maybe you could get. I mean, you have a standing desk. I'm sure it's easy to probably put a hot tub in there. I mean.
Oh yes. Well, what I want to do is I want to have a bar above so I can do pull-ups, and I'll get stronger as the stream progresses. But I wanted to touch on one last thing, which is now that we had this amazing conversation, where do we differ? Like Gio, Hotep Sophia, and Samuel, where do you think your differences are? Do you guys all agree on everything? What do you disagree on? That's what I want to see. Like, what is the last thing here that is still in disagreement? What do you think it is? Samuel, what do you think it is?
Well, I don't know you guys as well as you tell me where we disagree. I think we agree a lot on the diagnosis, maybe not as much on the prescription.
Process is what I was going to say. I don't think we agree on the process for the solution, but I think we have a clear agreement on the actual problem itself, which is important because a lot of people they don't see the problems from the proper lens, but I think that we definitely all have similar lenses for the problem.
And I definitely would love, Samuel, to have you back for talking about the solutions as well. You were a wonderful, guest. And
let me
I
just
really
ask you bluntly, though, before we go, what would, because this is your field of expertise, let's just say really simply in America, because we didn't talk a lot about geopolitics. When you see in America, there's very specific circumstances when it comes to poverty, especially poverty among, for example, a generation of men who've had their livelihoods offshored. What would you think, given the current climate, the solution? I mean, it's never going to be a solution. I mean, it's true what Christ said, poverty will always be with us. But in America, at least, it seems that there's an antipathy towards the poor, the working poor. Like, for instance, the other day we had the Sackler people that were associated with the Sackler family calling people pillbillies and saying, like, these people, if they get hooked and they die, then it's their fault, right? They don't have any self-control, which is some way, like, it's really weird because it's like a caricature of, like, the Ronald Reagan, like, welfare queen type of stuff. That like conservatives were very caught on, but now there's like almost a difference of like the health of the population in general being more productive to, for example, nationalist ends. Like, what would be your solution? Like, given your research, what do you think has to change now in order to alleviate the immense and increasing poverty situation in America? Not just like people that are on like the streets that are homeless, but like people that are like, work, quote unquote, working poor who have very unstable situations that maybe go from living in their car to a period to living on a friend's couch, like stuff like that. And you gave I quite enjoy the Bulwark, but
It's a piece I wrote. Deindustrialization is not just a white.
Is the Bulwark the new, I guess you would call it dissident post-left? Is that the one?
No, they're more like the neocons.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of the Bellows. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the Bellows. Yeah. The Bull. Oh, yeah. The Bull. Okay. Yeah. The Bulwark is kind of sus in a lot of.
Well, I'm trying to take in that message, right? The one that. Well, I do think it is interesting. In the 90s, there was this culture of poverty debate, right? And now we're realizing that, in the 80s, it was crack. And now in the 2010s, it was opiates, and a totally different class of people, but the common denominator was they had their good jobs disappeared, right? And so I think we can divide poverty into different buckets, right? There will always be income inequality. There will always be people who, because of disability, because they had an unplanned pregnancy, because XYZ issue, they run into financial difficulties. And that's why we need a social safety net. That's why we need programs like a child allowance, because raising kids is intrinsically expensive, and the market doesn't automatically pay you more just because you have kids. So, high on my list was a child allowance, and I spent the last 5 years working to help the
Yeah.
But the Biden credit just passed, and that on its own cuts child poverty by 50% relative to what it was before, because parents across the country, beginning in July, actually are going to be receiving $300 a month for their kids.
Yeah, but how do you know that they're not going to raise the prices of childcare by that much? Because that's
always
in my
problem.
community. That's pretty much what happens. Like they give you X amount for food stamps, and then the food prices go up. You know what I mean? Like I've seen that sort of thing.
That's a big issue when you give like vouchers or things that are tied to a specific good. So we do know that like daycare subsidies specifically, half of that goes to higher prices.
Yeah.
And that's because you're tying the subsidy to a particular good. If you just give parents cash, then they're able to, choose between different providers, and maybe childcare isn't even the thing. Maybe they're paying rent or paying for groceries or whatever.
But how much of an emphasis is there on root causes if we're talking about the family? If we're talking about, you know what I mean, like, because that goes such a long way when it comes to what happens.
But
to
even the
your
fact
kids.
that you can't like support a family anymore on single income, that's like a huge, like even the fertility crisis. I tend to believe it's other issues instead of like the Liz Brunegg thing of like, it's because of lack of childcare. I think it is like the economic, it is a factor, but there's other cultural issues. But when it comes to just the physically raising children, like Hotep Sophia, you've talked about this before. I don't know how you do it, like, because you don't take any assistance, you don't do any of that stuff, but yet you have kids and you struggle and you get by, and it's like, I
leverage the government. I mean, I don't take assistance per se, but I know how to leverage the governmental resources in my benefit. But I also did work in foster care. So I saw all my foster care kids sort of in a similar thing, and they were able to do all kinds of stuff. So I just took that philosophy of, okay, you use what you can get, and when you don't need anymore, you don't take it, but you take what you need when you need it. But another thing that I have actually done is cut down my expenses. So instead of having so many expenses, I have less expenses, which means that it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to raise kids when you don't have to take them to a school building. That means you're not burning gas. That means you don't have to buy, fast food breakfast, fast food lunch, all this type of stuff. I can cook at home. I have my mom lives with me, so I don't have to have an external babysitter.
You go, right there. That's another, moving away for
it's
a job.
It's a plan, though.
From your
friends,
moving away is number one. You have to live somewhere where it's inexpensive. People who don't make the choice to move where they can afford to live a nice life, that's their personal choice, and you can do it all you want. But I refuse to live somewhere, me personally, and I could have stayed in Maryland, just moved, somewhere further out, but I did not want to subject my children to the fact that the state may close on them again and they can't do anything. So you have to look at the big picture, and you have to make a choice for what you're willing to put your kids through. And a lot of millennials don't.
And when you were in DC, Hotep, did a lot of your friends, were they like the stereotype, the meme of like childless girl boss type of thing, or were you like the only one that had kids? Like,
No. I have all my friends have kids, but were they still girl bossing it? Yes, meaning I don't need a man, or they got this dude
and their kids were in daycare,
trash. Kids are in public school. You're telling them like the public schools suck. They're just like, well, I don't want to have to stay home with them. If I have to teach my kids, I'm gonna go crazy. Blah blah blah. Fast food, shopping at regular grocery store, McDonald's, all that stuff. Like we don't do that stuff. Like we just don't. Like I went to churches last night. That was Church's Chicken. It's like Popeyes. That was a big thing. They were like, oh my gosh, we got churches. You know what I mean? Like, because if we stop for something, it's like Chick-fil-A, or you're going to get a salad or something like that. But that's a very conscious effort I made, and also like I instill into my kids. And so it takes a lot of thought, but it's actually not expensive. Like there's now I get a food delivery. So I have my farm. I come back up the road to go to the farm because I can't find a farm that I like down here. So that's every other week I go and get my stuff from the farm up the road. But then down here I have a food delivery come every other week. And so instead of me going to Walmart and buying like overpriced dinners, I don't know what's in them, I have this food coming from the truck, and it's like healthy and whatever, and I don't have to worry about it. So there's it just
that's
takes a
another
lot of
thing.
thought.
Like food inflation, like especially here in Canada, like I think like they try to deny the numbers, but I mean objectively it's true. Like the inflation of the cost of just raw like foodstuffs is just wow. It's
Oh,
and
by the way, I wanted to post a photo. Sophie, you sent me this earlier in the email of your bundle.
Oh,
Enjoy. It's
yeah.
loading. The photo is hold on. Why isn't it working? What's going on here? Hold on. I'm gonna try
My
one
little
more
boo-boo.
time.
Well, I make a lot of stuff myself. Again, this is something
go.
that if modern woman would emphasize on living a good life and do what it took to live a good life instead of emphasizing on having a good job, she would see a lot of changes. But modern woman is devoted to modern jobs instead of their family. And there's not really a lot that I can, to say about that. I mean, if the feminism is, this is what it's done. And, I just, not for me. I
but I do notice decisions. Though there is kind of like a change now. Maybe it's just me on Twitter, the people I interact with, but I noticed there are like a lot of radical feminists now that are embracing a form of like maternalism as like maybe just to differentiate them from other groups in the left, but without getting too complicated.
Yeah.
But it's still like I noticed this change where supporting mothers and their children, that is like the sort of real trait of femininity in sort of like class. And of course, like a lot of them come from more like socialist or Marxist backgrounds because they realize that the aspect of class within just the ways in which, for example, even food inflation punishes families, especially women who are doing most of the purchasing of the family. I mean, that alone, like, it's like you go to any grocery store now, it's ridiculous, it just so happens like my family, because we're experts at like hunting down sales, but some people don't have an option, right? They don't,
you have to be like that. I mean, even in urban communities, you can do it, but again, it takes effort. Like you have to be devoted to not getting a job or not having to get a second job or whatever the case may be. You have to really, really work at it. And too many millennials, especially, I can really speak for my group, they're just too lazy to do stuff the right way. I mean, it's really unfortunate.
Well, but also if we're talking about, like, Adam Carolla likes to comment on the school to prison pipeline. Like, if we're talking about the people who don't have good influences in their lives, like, from what I understand, this used to be something that the church, as you said in previous streams, was responsible for maintaining, as far as if there are kids out there who are in the community who have a single mom, the church can kind of act as a surrogate parent and make sure they stay out of trouble. How much of this could be emphasized more, and is this something that possibly, like, either Samuel, your organization can do more with, or like what's the solution there? Like, I know this is like a whole bag of worms, but I am curious, Sophie, if you have any thoughts on the matter, something we can do about this.
Well, I think the one thing that people can do is take care of themselves. And if you can take care of yourself, then people will notice that and sort of gravitate to you. And I think that's personal responsibility is top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, my organization we're a national think tank, so we're not like, I'm not a soup kitchen doing things sort of in the field. But
no, I don't mean like that. I mean setting certain policy that would encourage more, more of this to happen.
So I tried to start out by saying that there's like, multiple ways you can carve up poverty because it's not all one phenomenon, right? So, I think having kids and the idea that, a quarter of, more than that, close to 40% of people who turn to TANF, or traditional welfare program, do, like, the precipitating event is they had a kid. And you don't want, like, procreation to be a risk factor for poverty because it's kind of essential to the species, right? So, like, what are so every one of these different areas has their own ad hoc thing. In the case of poverty, I think it's important, child poverty, it's important that we have systems like a child allowance that treats all parents equally. So, someone who does have kids are able to afford those expenses without having to turn to very paternalistic welfare programs that they can end up becoming trapped in, right? And many moms turn to TANF as a kind of maternity leave of last resort, which is kind of outrageous when you think about it. Like, why not just have maternity leave? And there are other issues that are unique to the U.S., like the broken healthcare system. And it's not just a matter of not having enough people with coverage. It's the fact that you lose your coverage if you switch jobs, if you are fired, if you need to qualify for Medicaid because there are asset tests that require you to show what savings you have. You are incentivized to spend down any assets may have accumulated just to qualify. Right. And those things are kind of absurd. Like you have families who are like trying to do the right thing, practice personal responsibility. They have savings and they're trying to save for their kids' future, but then they have a big medical emergency and they can't afford the health insurance. So they end up spending down what little assets they have to qualify. And that's just a broken system. Right. So a lot of my work is focused on those type of things. But then there are these other sort of what you refer to as kind of root cause issues, which is why my work sort of has grown to include industrial policy and that kind of stuff. Because even if you had a well-functioning healthcare system with a child allowance and like strong safety nets, robust unemployment insurance, all that jazz, you still have the problem of what happens when the good jobs disappear, and what are we doing to ensure that those people don't fall back and sort of fall into sort of spiraling deaths of despair or disintegrated communities that you lose those churches and all that civil society that is doing that more thicker wraparound kind of intervention. So it's not as simple as like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but it does matter that we have like the right sort of policy environment, and not to treat everything as just one homogeneous clump, that there are different types of poverty, different causes of poverty. Some are more complex than others. Sometimes it's just a matter of not having cash. And if there's anything that I extol, it's like we need to have a better a system that recognizes that it's both and that individual agency is really important to the Adam Carolla thing. Like you should be able to make your kid breakfast, whatever packet of hot cereal. By
the way, cereals have been a disaster for nutrition. Kid cereals,
except for Magic Spoon.
I
look at this.
not
Yeah,
buy
look what I
cereal
got.
in my
Oh,
house.
get that stuff. Get that flat humans of flat design
There's
out of there.
no
Get that
cereal
keto.
allowed in my house.
No, Gio, it's pretty good. You should try it.
It's just
I thought
unfortunate
I
that
thought the
it's...
I
school to prison
know.
pipeline
Humans
was
of flat. I know.
Yeah,
Wait, by the way.
Yeah.
Wait,
just-
Samuel.
it's
Do you
unfortunate
know
that's-
about humans of flat? Do you know about humans
Oh,
of flat? Do you know
God.
what Gio means when he says humans of flat?
Humans of flat. That's that keto cereal. I don't know anything else.
Well, no, it has nothing to do with the cereal.
It's
Gio,
the
can
design style of corporate modernity, hyper-modernity.
yeah.
The flat
But isn't
humans.
that like an indie thing?
Yeah, but it's like everywhere now. It's like, well, there's a whole long. I mean, if you have 3 other hours to spare, I'm going to write a book actually on it one day. But yeah, it's humans of flat design. Hopefully, I can get our good friend Eli Schiff to co-author it, or at least write something in it.
We had a great stream with him as well. For those who haven't seen that, I'm going to link it in the chat. But no, this is great. I think that we made a lot of progress here, Samuel, talking about this. And when it does come down to whether there is just this advance of technology and the zeitgeist, spirit of the times, whatever you want to call it, and we can only do as much as we can with what we are given in this time. That is one way. But I always say that the other way that, let's say, more conspiratorial-minded people look at is that, you know what, there are actually like specific trade deals that if somebody were to come in and there are specific, let's say, people, organizations who did specific things, that if those were reversed, it's not going to be utopia, but it's going to do a lot of good. And that's where I wouldn't necessarily say that finger blaming is completely off the table. And this is also a balance that I want to try to figure out. Like, what are these big things that could possibly, let's say, if there was an Occupy Wall Street style protest, let's pretend that they just say, revoke yada, yada, yada. And that would just be the one thing they're concentrating on so that everybody hears it loud and clear. I know, for example, we had comments before talking about getting rid of, I believe it was the 17th Amendment. Gio, is that...
Was it that?
That's the appointed senators.
Yes,
Oh
exactly.
yeah.
So something like that. I mean, that's a pretty broad one, but just as an example, that is somebody saying that if we get rid of this thing, it's going to
Yeah,
make
there are no
siblings.
quick fixes. There are just no
No.
quick
No,
fixes.
the only
and-
quick fix is to repeal the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote.
Based and Redfield.
Oh, man.
But she gets to say it, so we don't get to say it.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been a fantastic stream. Samuel, I really appreciate the time you spent with us here.
So-
I would love to have you
And
back.
what are
Yes.
you working on recently?
Yes.
Are you working on anything, or your institution, or?
We put out a paper called Level of America last month on how to do industrial policy. We put out a paper, so you want to do an infrastructure package about sort of like our lack of state capacity and why infrastructure costs are so high. Coming up,
Yeah.
we'll have a paper on sectoral bargaining and how to do that in America, how to revive labor unions. Right now, I'm personally working on the Endless Frontier Act. I had a post the other day on that, which is a big sort of tech R&D initiative. So I'm working on a whole bunch of stuff.
Nice.
Paid family leave.
Nice.
I'm trying to get that passed. So.
All right. Let me link to that as well. And I just want to say, Samuel Hammond, you are fantastic. This is a great conversation. If there is one final question that I want to ask you, it's and this is something we were asking before when we were doing the governance stream. When it comes to the whole doctor's credo of do no harm, where do you personally, just as your personal philosophy, stand on how do you make sure that the decisions that you make for the center, that you make in terms of the policy that you support, that it's not going to result in a dystopian hellscape? Like how do you make sure of that, like within your own mind, to do that kind of test?
Well, a few things. We have an old post, Public Policy After Utopia, that sort of talks about this problem. Or my colleagues detail this as another post. Kludocracy in America deals with these sort of the issues of technocracy and the challenge of trying to design a utopia as if you're like playing a game of chess or something like that. And that's just not how things work. Like I take a very comparative approach. So like one of the reasons I worked on child allowances is because I saw how Canada's child allowance worked and how successful it was. And I think there are different kinds of interventions that have different kinds of risks, right? So like giving parents cash to sort of live the life they want and direct those resources in a smart way doesn't mean they won't make mistakes, but it's mistakes that they have to own and they're responsible for. We could do a national daycare program that brings in Common Core style debates about like what infant curricula should be like, and like crowds out churches and civil society, like those kind of interventions.
Oh, look at Jose Sophia. Hold on, what's going on? Are you
those,
okay?
those kind of interventions have a much bigger risk, right? Like,
hold on.
Yes,
let's see.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Like an infant-based curricula. Oh my gosh, let these kids do nothing. Like,
yeah. And a lot of my
geez.
work is pushing back against like over credentialization and
that's a big thing.
In the childcare thing in particular. It's just like in DC they passed a law that you have to have an associate's degree to work at a daycare center. And it's like, well, like, do you think, who would you rather put your kid with? Like the Guatemalan grandmother who raised like 12 kids, or like some 29-year-old with an early childhood education certificate, right?
Childless girl boss, yes.
Yeah. Right. So like that credentialing is a total shit show and a lie. And like I feel like a lot of my job is actually not just doing no harm, but trying to point out bad ideas as much as it is putting forward good ideas.
That is beautiful. That is well
Great.
said. Samuel Hammond, Twitter.com. I love the fact that you were able to get ham and cheese. How are you so lucky? You must have some skull and bones tier insider connections in order to get a
that's
hand
cool.
No,
like
I
that.
joined in 2007, so I should have been smarter
there
and
you go.
like made a bunch of other ones.
There we go. Well, I have Left Po, which is pretty damn short as well. I joined in 2009, so
Thank
that
God I got
explains-
Giant Geo, which is the name that I had as an email since like 2005. I still have it, so that there you go. I was lucky.
Excellent. So what we are going to do next is we are going to do some announcements. We are going to have Samuel. Are you a fan, or have you ever heard of a lady named Brittany Venti?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Well, we
Uh.
are going to have Brittany Venti this Thursday coming up. That's going to be the Brittany Venti stream. We're going to have Versaloon. We're going to have James
Oh,
Healy of
God.
Women Posting L's. Have you heard of Women Posting L's?
No.
Okay, well,
I've heard of the concept of women posting L's, but
well, he's the originator. He's
Oh,
the
okay.
he's patient zero. This is where it started
I'm,
from.
I'm
Oh.
Canadian. I'm Canadian posting W's.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Very,
Excellent.
very rare that we post W's, but that's
Yeah, once in a while. Day of the Rake and all that. So anyway, guys, I want to thank you guys so much, so
he
much
just
for
says
doing
it
this.
so casually, like that. Just comes out.
Well, it
Day of the
cannot come
Rake and
soon
all
enough.
that. Yeah, it's
It cannot
okay.
come soon enough. So anyway, Hotep Sophia, it was an absolute pleasure to have you back
And
here
come back
again.
to Twitter.
Yes, please come back to Twitter. You have a Twitter. I mean, should I promote it? I mean, you've locked it. I don't know.
I'm on Gab.
You're on-
on Gab.
There you go.
Because Twitter, I just can't give away all of my
What's your
my
Gab
valuable
name?
It's the same thing. Dominique Rebel, which I've had since 2009. So we're the old Twitter heads on here. And I'm on Gab. It's the same. I think I might post some stuff on Twitter. I might unlock my page.
Oh, here we go. I found it.
I'm just
found
worried that if my page gets unlocked, that I'm a conspiracy theorist. So I want to wait a little bit longer, and we'll see if I can get through this year, or at least the next couple months, and then I'll probably unlock it.
I just imagine an image, like if this was like if you were a man, I would imagine an image of that handsome Chad face. It says, of course I'm a conspiracy theorist. How could you tell?
Giga Chad, yes. Yes, that would be me. Of course, I'm a
Good
conspiracy theorist. I think things will calm down a little bit. They already have, so I'm looking at it. I did go on Twitter and retweet for this stream, so I'll try to at least remember to do that.
Thank you. Excellent.
All right,
and
this
of
is
course,
it.
this is it. This is the end. Well,
Oh, of course, Patreon.com.
Okay, definitely legit. The magnet. I still have this magnet over here. It's the glowing eyes. Have you seen this, Sophia? Have you seen this? Look at this
I
thing.
haven't seen it. Oh, God. Okay, I've been meaning to go to Patreon. I'm gonna have to.
So that is
I
the
need me a
$30
legit
tier.
magnet. Okay, that's cool. I've been meaning to do that. Oh my gosh.
So this is the $20 tier
Oh, yeah,
magnet of definitely legit. Our favorite collie, Lassie dog of all time. And so this is something that you get for $20. For $5, you get access to the super secret parts of our Discord. But also, Gio, we did an amazing episode, the first Patreon-only episode. And I love that we got to go outside afterwards. During the stream, I went outside. I was showing Gio the old school that I used to go to, and it was just, and almost everybody went outside while doing the stream. Like, this was still running. I was just on my cell phone.
4 people that were doing IRL streaming, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And
And
I
we
was
talked
reading
about
Berserk for the first time, yeah.
Yeah, how are you liking it, by the way, Gio?
Oh,
You
it's
like
pretty
Berserk?
great. I think I'm almost at the point where Griffith betrays.
Wait, don't
guts.
spoil it. Don't spoil
sorry.
it for
Yeah,
me.
sorry.
Well, Samuel, have you seen Berserk?
No.
I highly recommend it. Gio, right? Isn't Berserk amazing?
I don't like anime, but this is the first manga I've ever read, so it's pretty cool.
I like the
There we
Promised
go.
Neverland. That was good. Season 1 at
Hmm.
least.
Perfect. All right, guys, this is the end of the stream. Oh, and of course, $50 gets a custom magnet. So whatever you want, my dad's going to make a magnet out of it. We're also going to have the painted figures from Warhammer 40k from Jules. You're going to have, well, first of all, for the $30 stream, I forgot to say, you're going to have beautiful prints from Gio, which I'm going to show on the screen right now. And for
Well, we can't see it, but you can see it.
Yeah, and for $50, you're going to have all of the above, plus, like I mentioned before, custom print, and any of the tiers is going to have these episodes that we do, which is for patrons only. Patrons only, patrons only, patrons only. So again, you guys are going to get exclusive content you're not going to get anywhere else. And this is what we do. Look, we brought Samuel Hammond here from the prestigious, I'm going to say it wrong again, Nixon and Center. I didn't say it right, did I?
Niskanen.
Niskanen. I always say it the wrong way. But anyway, from the prestigious Niskanen
Named after
Center.
Bill Niskanen, one one of Ronald Reagan's chief economists. So there you go.
There we
We're-
go.
I'm the lizard person.
No, Reagan was cool. I don't see him as being lizard-like. But anyway, when it comes to bringing people together who are both like very online from the internet with people who are established, nobody does this but us. We're the only ones that are doing it, and we're going to continue to do it, and we're going to grow stronger. We're going to bring on more people from the World Economic Forum. We're going to bring in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I don't care. No, this is happening. I have the will to power, and I can bring in whoever I want.
Oh, we finally
and I'm
got
gonna
Brady
do it.
Venti, so that's one thing.
Yes,
There you
that's
go.
where it starts. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every last one of you, even the crazy people. You know who you are, who like to post. You know what you want to post. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this. I appreciate you. Mwah! Subscribe.
God bless.
Have a good night.
Goodbye.